Were we going to start the next chapter, chapter 15, right? The possibility. Okay, so just a disclaimer. I've just been recovering from flu and a sore throat. So if my voice is a little raspy, please ignore. So shall I start with the last passage and then we will continue? To know him is our soul's highest welfare and the condition of its perfection. But to know and realize him as a transcendent peace and silence is not all. The secret that has to be learned is at once the secret of the eternal and unborn divine and the secret of the divine birth and works. Janma karma sa me divyam. The action which proceeds from that knowledge will be free from all bondage. He who so knoweth me, says the teacher, is not bound by works. If the escape from the obligation of works and desire and from the wheel of rebirth is to be the aim and the ideal, then this knowledge is to be taken as the true, the broad way of escape. For says the Gita, he who knows in their right principles my divine birth and works comes when he leaves his body, not to rebirth, but to me, O Arjuna. Through the knowledge and possession of the divine birth, he comes to the unborn and imperishable divine, who is the self of all things. Ajo Avyay Atma, through the knowledge and execution of divine works, to the master of works, the Lord of all beings, Bhutanam Ishvara, he lives in that unborn being. His works are those of that universal mastery. So last time we read and contemplated about the Shara and the Akshara, both being part of the one divine manifestation, and that if one took either the impersonal, permanent, infinite as the whole, one was missing the truth. One has to also see that the Shara, which is the personal, finite, material life, that is also divine, and that the Purushottam manifests himself both embodied in the world and above. So this idea of the divine being and the divine consciousness pervading matter, pervading life, and obviously they're transcendent and above the Shara and the Akshara. This is a very important concept to understand not only in the Gita, but even in practical, practice, because this principle of divine works can only be understood when one realizes that the divine is embodied in matter, and that and the divine consciousness is in matter, in life, in mind, and not just above in some transcendent self. Now we come to chapter 15, the possibility and purpose now of Avatarhood. So really, in other words, this chapter is going to explore the possibility and more important, the purpose of Avatarhood. So why, in simple words, why does the divine manifest himself in a human body? What is the purpose of his incarnation and his embodiment? And why does he come on earth? in a human body. Why does he take it on? So the possibility and purpose of avatarhood. So avatarhood in is a Hindi word, it's Sanskrit word, but avatar, but in simple words, because now we have avatars in social media and AI and so on. Everybody has an avatar. So they've obviously used it in a different sense, but avatar in its original sense means the manifestation of the divine consciousness. Okay. In speaking of this yoga, in which action and knowledge become one, so in speaking of this yoga, the yoga of the Gita, in which action and knowledge become one, the yoga of the sacrifice of works with knowledge, in which works are fulfilled in knowledge, knowledge supports, changes, and enlightens works, and both are offered to the Purushottam, both knowledge and works. The supreme divinity, who is the Purushottam? The supreme divinity who becomes manifest within us as Narayan, Lord of all our being and action, seated secret in our hearts forever, who becomes manifest even in the human form as the avatar. So here is the distinction between, very important to understand, Purushottam and avatar. So the Purushottam is the supreme divinity who is seated secretly in our hearts forever. But he's also who becomes manifest even in the human form as the avatar. But when this supreme being becomes manifest in a human form, he is called the avatar. And what is the avatar? The avatar is the divine birth taking possession of our humanity. The divine work taking possession of our humanity. Krishna has declared in passing that this was the ancient and original yoga which he gave to Vivashan. So he declared in passing in the Gita that the yoga I'm going to give you, which he passed on to Arjuna, is the yoga, is ancient, original yoga, which he gave to who? Vivashan. Who is Vivashan? Vivashan? Anyone? Very famous guy. Vivashan, yeah, the sun god. But Vivasan gave it to Manu, the father of men. Manu gave it to Iksh, Ikshvaku, head of the solar line. And so it came down. Sorry?
Ikshvaku. Mamita Di, I'm back after a long time.
Thank God. I was missing
So
your
sorry.
pronunciations.
Sorry.
Okay. Right. Manu gave it to Ikshvaku, head of the solar line, and so it came down from royal sage to royal sage, till it was lost in the great lapse of time, and is now renewed for Arjuna. So, this ancient yoga is, you see, in a sense, and that is why the Gita is such a perennial, eternal text that does not, lose its importance and practice and significance, and actually keeps renewing itself. Because this yoga that Sri Krishna brings back is the ancient yoga that he gave to now this sun god. I mean, does anyone know the story of Vivashan? Anuradha, do you know?
Oh, not really. I'm
No.
not sorry.
Okay. So the sun god, Vivashan, gave it to Manu. Manu, as you know, is the father of men. and he gave it to the head of the solar line, and so it came down from royal sage to royal sage till it was lost in the great lapse of time. And that's very important to understand. It was lost in the great lapse of time and is now renewed for Arjuna because he is the lover and devotee, friend and comrade of the Avatar. So there you have an understanding of who Arjuna is. For this, he says, is the highest secret, thus claiming for it a superiority to all other forms of yoga. Because, and I think between this Patanjali yoga was in between, before the the yoga that was brought, the Gita's yoga, was before. So again, it's very important to understand where this yoga stems from, and that's why you have uh, the Vedas have this in the Isha Upanishad. You will see that a lot of the ideas of the Isha Upanishad, of the fact idea of matter being divine, of the different levels of manifestation are which were lost in between have come back. Now, where were we? Till it was lost in the great lapse of time and is now renewed for Arjuna, because he is the lover and devotee, friend and comrade of the Avatar. For this, he says, is the highest secret, thus claiming for it a superiority to all other forms of yoga. Because those other forms of yoga lead to the impersonal Brahman or to a personal deity, to a liberation in actionless knowledge or a liberation in absorbed beatitude. But this gives the highest secret and the whole secret. It brings us to divine peace and divine works, to divine knowledge, action, and ecstasy, unified in a perfect freedom. It unites into itself all the yogic paths as the highest being of the divine reconciles and makes one in itself all the different and even contrary powers and principles of its manifested being. So it unites in itself all the yogic paths as the highest being of the divine. Also, it reconciles and makes one in itself all the different and even contrary powers and principles of its manifested being. Therefore, this yoga of the Gita is not, as some contend, only the Karma Yoga, one and the lowest, according to them, of the three paths, but the highest yoga, synthetic and integral, directing Godward all the powers of our being. So those who read the yoga of the Gita as purely a text of Karma Yoga, he's dispelling that idea. He's saying, please note, therefore this yoga of the Gita is not, as some contend, only the Karma Yoga. It's not just the yoga of works. It's the yoga of knowledge. It's the yoga of devotion, yoga of works. All is a synthetic yoga. One, and the yoga, Karma Yoga is considered one and the lowest, according to them, of the three paths. So what are the three paths? Karma, Bhakti, and Jnana Yoga. So the three paths, okay? So one and the lowest, according to them, of the three paths, but the yoga of the Gita is the highest yoga, synthetic, synthesizes, and integral, directing Godward all the powers of the being. And that is important because what he means by all the powers of the being, what are our powers? We have the mind, we have the heart, and we have the body. So all three, the karma yoga is what the body works and acts. The bhakti yoga is the emotional being, the devotional being, and then the mind is the mind of knowledge, higher minds of knowledge that have to purify the lower and so on, and the lower emotion and the grosser body. So this is a very interesting in this one line. He says a lot. He says, therefore, this yoga of the Gita is not a self-content, only the karma yoga, one and the lowest of the three parts, but a highest yoga, synthetic and integral, directing Godward all the powers of our being. So that is very important to understand, and that's why in the yoga we have the yoga of discrimination, the knowledge chapters of knowledge, the chapters. There are various chapters, and in the end, it is the bhakti. And in the end, he says, "Give yourself completely to me, surrender yourself." That is the highest thing. Arjuna takes the declaration about the transmission of the yoga in its most physical sense. Arjuna takes the declaration about the transmission of the yoga in its most physical sense. There is another significance in which it can be taken, and asks Sri Krishna, asks how the sun god, one of the firstborn of beings, um, how the sun god, one of the firstborn of beings, ancestor of the solar dynasty, can have received the yoga from the man Krishna, who is only now born into the world. So he asks this question. So Krishna does not reply, as we might have expected him to have done, that it was as we might have expected him to have done, that it was as the divine who is the source of all knowledge that he gave the word to the Deva, who in his form of knowledge, giver of all inner and outer light, um, Bharge Savitur Devasya Yu. Anuradha, would you like to say that? Prachodhyat. There's no the, yeah, yeah. So,
Bhargo Bhargo
yes,
devasya savituhu.
yeah. Savitur Devasya Yo
Devasya
no.
yono dhiyo yonah prachodayat.
Yeah. So it's interesting that he says that um, he asked this question, how did he come? And then Krishna, which he does not reply, and Sri Aurobindo ex explains, is that it was as the divine who is the source of all knowledge that he gave the word to the Deva, who in his form of knowledge, the Deva in his form of knowledge, giver of all inner and outer light, he accepts instead the opportunity which Arjuna gives him of declaring his concealed Godhead. So instead of giving him an answer that, how come you gave this to the sun god when he came long before you and you were not born and you're born now, he takes this opportunity to answer and give Arjuna another kind of reply. And what is that? He accepts instead the opportunity which Arjuna gives him of declaring his concealed Godhead, a declaration for which he had prepared when he gave himself as the divine example for the worker who is not bound by his works, but which he has not yet quite explicitly made. Yes, but which he has not yet quite explicitly made. He now openly announces himself as the incarnate Godhead, the Avatar. Okay. Right. So can you explain this line, Anuradha? Bhargava? Savitur devasya yuno dhiya prachodayat.
Yeah, sorry. Yes. So the Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi here, it's the Gayatri mantra where the order of the words has been changed a little bit. But Bhargaha is one form. So the Gayatri mantra itself goes Tat Savituhu Varenyam, that highest form of that creative aspect of the sun. Savituhu is
Hmm.
the creative aspect of the sun. So Tat Savituhu Varenyam, which is the highest form of that.
Hmm.
Bhargo Devasya. Bhargaha is one who fulfills, who's full of everything, who's full. So Bhargaha Devasya Dhimahi. We meditate on that. And what is the nature of our meditation? Dhiyo yo naha prachodaya. So Dhiya means our higher intelligence, the intellect, the buddhi. The dhi here comes from buddhi. Dhiyo, yo, the one who, so it's to that sun. Naha,
Hmm.
our. Prachodayat, enlighten that. So
Yes.
the foundation of this idea is, or the basis of this particular invocation is the recognition that the instrument through which we are functioning, the human being, the highest instrument that they have been given within the mental framework is the buddhi, which is the connecting level with the higher consciousness, it's the higher intelligence. So it says that please, this creative truth aspect, because Sri Aurobindo equates Savita and this entire Gayatri mantra to the truth. The sun is symbolic of the truth in Vedic psychology. So it is an invocation to that higher truth to illumine one's mind, not just individual mind, because of the recognition that for accidents not to occur, it has to be a collective enlightenment. So therefore, he says, Dhiyo yo naha. Naha means our minds. So the Gayatri mantra is actually a collective an individual doing it for the collective, uh, invoking truth so that we are uh, guided by the truth of our paths in life and action.
Good. So he says this, and then he says he now openly announces himself. Who now? Krishna announces himself as the incarnate Godhead. So he's prepared Arjuna by giving his example as saying, what do I have to gain by working, and yet I work. So in the same way, you have to do works without expectation of result and without desire and without preference. So we had occasion already, when speaking of the divine teacher, to state briefly the doctrine of Avatarhood as it appears to us in the light of Vedanta, the light in which the Gita presents it to us. We must now look a little more closely at this Avatarhood and at the significance of the divine birth, of which it is the outward expression. So we must now look more closely at Avatarhood and the significance of the divine birth, of which it is the outward expression, for that is a link of considerable importance in the integral teaching of the Gita. And we may first translate the words of the teacher himself, in which the nature and purpose of Avatarhood are given summarily, and remind ourselves also of other passages or references which bear upon it. In quotation marks, this is the direct translation of the shloka. Many are my lives that are past, says Sri Krishna, and thine also, O Arjuna. All of them I know, but thou knowest not. O scourge of the foe, though I am the unborn, though I am imperishable in my self existence, though I am the Lord of all existences, Yet I stand upon my own nature, and I come into birth by my self-maya. For whensoever there is the fading of the dharma and the uprisingness and the uprising of unrighteousness, then I my lose with a uh, double O. Then I lose myself forth into birth. So here he gives the whole thing, who he is and how he comes into birth by his own self-maya. That means he veils his own divine consciousness so that he can enter into the uh, human body, because otherwise it would not be possible. So I am the Lord of all existences, yet I stand upon my own nature, and I come into birth by my self-maya. But whenever there is the fading of the dharma, and you see, in history, when you look at the succession of avatars that have come, each has come at a very critical moment of the earth's history and crisis. Can anyone give me some examples? Yes, though he was a great teacher, he's not considered an avatar. So the avatars would be what we consider hmm,
The 10 avatars,
the
no? Of
10 Dasha avatars, yeah. So
like
the
in the
hmm,
case
what are
of
the 10 avatars? Starting with the fish.
Matsya, Kurma, Varaha, so the fish, the turtle, the boar, Matsya, Kurma, Varahascha, Narasimhotta, Vamanaha. Narasimha is the half man, half animal. We see it's the
Mhm.
whole evolutionary process that even Darwin talks about, really. Narasimhotta, Vamanaha, the short man. So in
Hmm.
the case of the Bali in Kerala, no, he walked on his 3 steps. He asked him for 3 steps, and he conquered the 3 worlds. And then he said, "The third one, where do I put it?" So he puts him under the earth. So every time there has
Hmm.
been an asura who's been destroying everything with his megalomania, the being a so Vamana, then Rama, Ramascha. There are 3 Ramas. So
Hmm.
there is Rama, then Parashurama, and Balarama.
Hmm.
Buddha, Kalki. So Buddha also comes into that particular framework. Buddha, Kalki, Te Dashaha.
Hmm. So, what is the most recent attack on the Earth's evolutionary future? The uprising of in the 20th century,
Kalki is what
world wars,
world was.
Hitler. Um, so each time there's been a huge crisis, there has been the need for the presence of the avatar. Um, the crisis is also considered an avatar, but there are two kinds of avatars. There's a full avatarhood, and there is a uh, concealed or partial avatarhood. So the full avatars are there, but he is also in the line. If you read Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. So let us continue. Um, we had occasion already. Where were we? No. So he says this. For whensoever there is the fading of the dharma and the uprising of unrighteousness, then I lose myself forth into birth for the deliverance of the good, for the destruction of the evildoers, for the enthroning of the right. I am born from age to age, yuge yuge. So I am born from age to age. So Ravan and Rama. Um, Which are the others? Who is the
Treta,
great Asura? Hmm?
Hiranyakashipu,
Yeah, Hiranyakashyap. And then in time of Sri Krishna,
Mahabharata,
the Mahabharata, Duryodhana, and of
Kansa.
course
So it's very
Kans.
interesting. It's very interesting to note that as the yugas are getting diluted, the demon is not no longer individualized but multiplied into the many. because adharma is not just symbolized by one individual. Like in the Ramayana, there is Ravana. He's symbolic
Really.
of the destruction of the entire kula. In the Mahabharata, we already see that it's not one. It's Duryodhana and his entire team. Uh,
Hmm.
and there we also see that the righteous, if you are siding with the wrong, you are as good as having committed adharma. And then in the Kali Yuga, it has been completely distributed across humanity. So there is no single figure who becomes the evil, the
Well,
Rakshasa, but the quality of the Rakshasa has become merged with the population, and that is what is prevalent. And therefore, the work is not about the destruction of one person, it is about the destruction of the Rakshasa in each one of us. So it's a very interesting progression.
yet I think that Hitler does symbolize a, a particular uh, you know force that was had been loosed to destroy the world, and as you all have read several accounts of uh, several authors in an autobiographical notes, you will see the action that was taken against him in the occult spheres. But yes, the battle then became from a physical battle to an occult one. Anyway, so um, for the deliverance of the good, for the destruction of the evildoers, for the enthroning of the right, I am born from age to age. He who knoweth thus, in the right principle, in its right principles, my divine birth and my divine work, when he abandons his body, comes not to rebirth. He comes to me, O Arjuna, delivered from liking and fear and wrath, full of me, taking refuge in me. Many purified by austerity of knowledge have arrived at my nature of being, Madhbhavan, the divine nature of the Purushottama. As men approach me, so I accept them to my love. Men follow in every way my path, O son of Pritha. So does anyone have the Sanskrit shloka of this particular? Because this is a very famous one, delivered from liking and fear and wrath,
These
full
are,
of me, take refuge.
these are
Yes,
chapter 4 of the Gita, shloka 5 to 11.
right. These ones, right? So, and this particular one, the last
Part
one.
of it. That one, yada yada hi dharmasya glanir
Yeah.
bhavati.
Yes. Okay. But most men, the Gita goes on to say, desiring the fulfillment of their works, sacrifice to the gods. Now, here gods is in small g. So this is not the Godhead, but the fulfillment of their works, meaning desiring. So they sacrifice the smaller Godheads. But most men, the Gita goes on to say, desiring the fulfillment of their works, sacrifice to the gods, to various forms and personalities of the one Godhead, because the fulfillment, siddhi, that is born of works without knowledge, is very swift and easy in the human world. It belongs, indeed, to the world alone. So this fulfillment of works without knowledge, is very swift and easy in the human world. So what do? We go to Shiva and ask for a boon. We go to Durga and ask for and pray. We go to whoever it might be and Ganesha and say, please remove all these obstacles in my business. I have to do. So these are the gods we pray to. You see, we all walk barefoot hundreds of kilometers up some temple, come down. But what is it that we are seeking? Seeking all the worldly uh, pursuits and the worldly sense of, you know, accomplishments. So he says, but it is very easy in this world to get this by uh, of sacrificing to the gods, to various forms and personalities of the one Godhead, because the fulfillment that is born of works, siddhi of works without knowledge, is very swift and easy in the human world. It belongs indeed to the world alone. The other, the divine self-fulfillment in man, by the sacrifice with knowledge to the Supreme Godhead, with a capital G, is much more difficult. So there are two kinds of sacrifices. And here Sri Krishna distinguishes and each one. So she said there's a worldly sacrifice of trying to gain worldly uh, desires and pursuits, fame, name, wealth, no obstacles, peace, good family, whatever it might be, all the worldly. And then there is the other thing. So the divine self-fulfillment in man. What is the other? The fulfillment of man of divinity. So the divine self-fulfillment in man by sacrifice with knowledge. The first is without knowledge. You don't need knowledge for that. With knowledge to the Supreme Godhead is much more difficult. Its results belong to a higher plane of existence, and they are less easily grasped. Men, therefore, so you see in all our movies, epics, how some great sage goes and does havans and sacrifices, whether it's Ravan and he asks for so many more, or it's Vishwamitra or whoever it might be. So, these are the boons you get from sacrifice, tapasya, penance, but for a worldly end. Sorry? Hmm. Hmm. So with knowledge is jnana. With the knowledge of the full understanding the of the divine and what is the purpose of life and the whole uh, awakening of the buddhi to the higher knowledge, full knowledge, not steeped in ignorance, but awake, not steeped in the ego, but steeped in an understanding of the divine and of the knowledge of the divine. That is with knowledge. So, the divine self-fulfillment in man by sacrifice with knowledge to the Supreme Godhead is much more difficult. Its results belong to a higher plane of existence, and they are less easily grasped. Men therefore have to follow the fourfold law of their nature and works, and on this plane of mundane action, they seek the Godhead through his various qualities. Can anyone explain this? Follow the fourfold law of his nature. What are the fourfold law? Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishyas,
Shudra,
the fourfold
Brahmana,
knowledge. Hmm?
Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra.
Right. So, but he says, I am the doer of the fourfold works and creator of its fourfold law. Men therefore have to follow the fourfold law of their nature. So, in a sense, what Sri Krishna is saying, that because it is so difficult to attain this knowledge, and it's less and very difficult to grasp what this is, therefore, he says, uh, we have to follow. There's a certain what should I say? There are certain methods and ways of doing that. So one is men therefore have to follow the fourfold law of their nature. So if you are a Brahmin, and your path is of jnana, of knowledge, then you follow that, and through that you come to the other aspects of bhakti and uh, sacrifice of works. If you are a Kshatriya, which is what Arjuna in his nature and inner temperament is, then you follow the highest path of the Kshatriya towards self-knowledge and knowledge of the divine. So the qualities of a Kshatriya, the path of the Kshatriya, and through your sacrifice, and through your works, you attain knowledge. So this is what he's saying. Yeah. Men therefore have to follow the fourfold law of their nature and works, and on this plane of mundane action, they seek the Godhead through his various qualities. But, says Krishna, though I am the doer of the fourfold work and creator of its fourfold law, yet I must be known also as the non-doer, the imperishable, the immutable self. Works affect me not, nor have I desire for the fruit of works. For God is the impersonal beyond this egoistic personality, and this strife of the modes of nature, and as the Purushottam also, the impersonal personality, he possesses this supreme freedom even in works. So, um, this is what Sri Krishna explains. Again, the same idea that has been expressed earlier.
Amitaji, can I just share one thing, please? Here,
Yes.
regarding the fourfold works, the original idea of this comes from the Rig Veda in the Purusha Sukta. So, the Purusha Sukta is about the divine cosmic being. And the cosmic being, it is said, the head becomes the Brahmana, the arms become the Kshatriya, the procreatory part becomes the Vaishya, and the feet are the Shudra. So, in Sri Aurobindo's discussion of the Chaturvarna and their actions, what he says that while of course we have a tendency to express more of one part of that Supreme Purusha, which we are born for, which is could be a Swadharma. He says the ideal situation for representing the Purusha in action is when we are able to incarnate all four of them as and when required. So if there is a task which requires us to perform the works of the Brahmana, we should evoke the Brahmana quality within to do that particular work. When another occasion might require us to become the protectors, the supervisors, then we have to become that. So while there is a separation of the four varnas in separate individuals, there is, according to Shobhanan, that is his unique contribution, where he says that we have to bring it all into us and replicate the cosmic Purusha, because we are also the cosmic Purusha, and live up to each quality as and when the situation demands it. And when we do it with that spirit, then we are not bound by the individuality. We are not colored by any one. And then we can get into the nishkama karma, the detached work to the best of its
Mm,
ability. So this is a very
mm,
special thing that Sri Aurobindo really brings into this
yes.
discourse of the Chaturvarna.
Mm, yes. I'm glad you brought that up. Um, so, but here we are, Sri Aurobindo is sticking to the Gita's text. And here, of course, Sri Krishna is saying that I am the doer of the fourfold works and the creator of its fourfold law. Yet I must be known also as the non-doer, the imperishable, the immutable self. Again, this idea that he is both the Shara and the Akshara, both, and therefore not to have this division between the two. So works affect me not, nor have I desire for the fruit of works. For God is the impersonal beyond this egoistic personality. And this strife of the modes of nature, the strife between the different modes of nature, and as the Purushottam also, the impersonal personality. So, as the Purushottam, he is the impersonal personality. He possesses this supreme freedom even in works. So, this idea, this supreme freedom and this impersonal personality is something which is a very clear characteristic of the divine consciousness. So, he who thus knows me is not bound by his works. Of course, he who thus knows me is not, we also know, it's not a knowing of the mind. He who thus knows me is a jnana yoga of real identity and understand knowledge. He who thus knows me is not bound by his works. So knowing was work done by the men of old. So knowing was the work done by the men of old who sought liberation. Do therefore thou also work of that more ancient kind, done by ancient men. So this knowingness, it's an English word, so we tend to understand it in a different way. Here, of course, he's not meaning that. This knowingness, and again it goes back to the ancient yoga. He says that is how the men of old did their works. When he refers to Raja Jana, and who is embodiment of this kind of yoga. And so knowing was work done by the men of old who sought liberation. Do therefore thou also work of that more ancient kind, done by ancient men. So he is enjoining Arjuna not to leave the battlefield, not to say that I do not want all this, and I therefore I'm going to walk away, and I can't see all my brothers and in destroyed, and I shall not destroy them. But on the other hand, he's also telling Arjuna, don't get too attached to what you're doing and to the purpose, understand that it is me and I who am doing it, and bring your lower nature, uplift your lower nature, and give it to me, the surrender, and of course, offering. So, this idea of knowledge through works. Now, the work he's asking Arjuna here to do is being asked by the avatar, by the divine teacher. He is asking his disciple to go into the battle and, uh, you know, destroy the other side. Now, um, he then also says that I have no need to do this. And for you, if you really want to do this in the right way, you have to have an impersonal personality, not get attached either to doing or non doing, because both are me. Instead, become centered in my consciousness. My consciousness is the divine consciousness. So, this is what he's talking to Arjuna. He who thus he who thus knows me is not bound by his works. So knowing was work done by the men of old. Do therefore thou work of that more ancient kind done by ancient men. The second portion of these passages, which has here been given in substance, explains the nature of divine works. Divyam karma. Now there's a distinction between divyam karma, divine works, and ordinary works. So what is it? Second portion explains the nature of these divine works, with the principle of which we have had to deal in the last essay, the principle of divine works, which we just read. The first, which has been fully translated, explains the way of the divine birth, Divyam Janma. So the first explains the way of the divine birth, the Avatarhood. But we have to remark carefully that the upholding of dharma in the world is not the only object of the descent of the avatar. So, the first is about the Divyam Janma, but he also says it is not the only object that of the descent of the avatar to uphold the dharma. That great mystery of the divine manifest in humanity. So, wait, let me just do that again. But we have to remark carefully that the upholding of dharma in the world is not the only object of the descent of the avatar, that great mystery of the divine manifest in humanity. What is the avatar? That is the great mystery of the divine, which is manifest in humanity. But the upholding of the dharma is not an all-sufficient object in itself, not the supreme possible aim for the manifestation of a Christ. So, a Krishna, a Buddha, here he's mentioning the avatars. Okay? So, not the supreme possible aim for the manifestation of Christ, a Krishna, a Buddha, but is only the general condition of a higher aim and a more supreme and divine utility. Okay? So there are two aspects of the divine birth. One is a descent, the birth of God in humanity, the Godhead manifesting itself in the human form and nature, the eternal avatar. The other is an ascent, the birth of man into the Godhead, man rising into the divine nature and consciousness. Madbhavam agatam. It is the being born anew in a second birth of the soul. So the second birth of the soul. It is that new birth which Avatarhood and the upholding of the Dharma are intended to serve. Are you with me? Okay. Sorry? Oh, you're trying to grasp it, okay. So what is he saying here? One, that the only object of an avatar is not just for upholding the Dharma. There is a larger, um, there is a higher aim and a more supreme and divine utility for the reason that an avatar comes into a human body. The divine comes into the human body as an avatar. And there are two aspects of the divine birth of the avatar. One is the descent of the avatar of the divine into the body. The one is the ascent of man into divinity. So when, as an example, he's a role model. So therefore, this aspirational that I too can ascend from my lower human nature to the higher. Both these are the others. So one is the upholding of the dharma, but also one is a descent, the birth of God in humanity, the Godhead manifesting itself in the human form and nature, the eternal avatar. The other is an ascent, the birth of man into the Godhead, man rising into the divine nature and consciousness. It is the being born anew in a second birth of the soul. It is that new birth which Avatarhood and the upholding of the Dharma are intended to serve. So the Avatar also comes so that man may rise in consciousness, may evolve in consciousness, may see that what is possible, that I too can like, become divine.
Something like, for example, in the Ramayana, Rama is a very good example of that. So the coming of Rama has served as an Adarsha. He has served as the ideal person, ideal king in
Yes.
many ways across yugas. So that with that divyam karma, they become role models for society.
Yes, they become role, and so has Christ, because it is his willingness to sacrifice, his understanding of deep love and charity, that has created a new, form from a very, very uncivilized, what should I say, rudimentary race, which was only ready to kill and war. So these are things that the divine avatar does. Now, yet it is necessary. Where was I? This double aspect in the Gita's doctrine of avatarhood is apt to be missed. Listen to this. In a second birth of the soul, it is that new birth which avatarhood and the upholding of the Dharma are intended to serve. This double aspect in the Gita's doctrine of avatarhood is apt to be missed by the cursory reader, satisfied, as most are, with catching a superficial view of its profound teachings, and it is missed too by the formal commentator, petrified in the rigidity of the schools. So here petrified is used in the true sense of the word, not in the way that we use it as fear, but petrified is fossilized, from the word petri. Okay, this double aspect of the Gita's doctrine of avatarhood is apt to be missed by the cursory reader, satisfied and so on, and is missed too by the formal commentator. Yet it is necessary, surely, to the whole meaning of the doctrine. Otherwise, the avatar idea would be only a dogma, a popular superstition, or an imaginative or mystic deification of historical or legendary supermen. Not what the Gita makes all, not what the Gita makes all its teaching. A deep philosophical and religious truth, and an essential part of, or step to, the supreme mystery of all. Rahasyam Uttamam. So this Rahasyam Uttamam, the supreme secret, the deep secret, talks a lot about the secret. The secret is a very big secret. It's so deep and full and powerful and profound that to really delve into it will need a lot of understanding, meditation, contemplation. What is Sri Krishna saying here? What is it? What is this he keeps saying? I'll give you the supreme secret, the deepest secret, this Rahasyam Uttamam, the secret of secrets. And what is the secret of secrets that he shares with us in the Gita? So we should stop here today. Any comments or questions or explanations?
We
Okay?
will be looking into the secret of secrets next time, na?
Yeah, secret of secrets next time. I want you to meditate on what the secret of secrets can be this time. See what it is. What do you understand by this Rahasyam Uttamam that Sri Krishna is trying to slowly lead Arjuna towards? Okay, so we shall sit quietly and meditate. Moment of consecration and offering to the divine to illuminate our consciousness, open our minds and hearts to the divine knowledge and wisdom. We will page 149. Hmm? 148, okay. We'll take the last paragraph from 147, which starts with the second portion of these passages, which has here been given in substance, explains the nature of divine works, divyam karma, with the principle of which we have had to deal in the last essay. The first, which has been fully translated, explains the way of the divine birth, Divyam Janma, the Avatarhood. But we have to remark carefully that the upholding of Dharma in the world is not the only object of the descent of the Avatar. That great mystery of the divine manifest in humanity. For the upholding of the Dharma is not an all sufficient object in itself, not the supreme possible aim for the manifestation of a Christ, a Krishna, Buddha, but is only the general condition of a higher aim and a more supreme and divine utility. For there are two aspects of the divine birth. One is a descent, the birth of God in humanity, the Godhead manifesting itself in the human form and nature, the eternal avatar. The other is an ascent, the birth of man into the Godhead, man rising into the divine nature and consciousness. Madbhavam agataha. It is the being born anew in a second birth of the soul. It is that new birth which avatarhood and the upholding of the dharma are intended to serve. So the descent of the avatar is not just the preservation, upholding of dharma, but it is also the avatar is born into humanity so that man can ascend into the avatarhood or into the divine. So it is like an example or a role model. So he's also there as a role model. Now, it is that new birth which avatarhood and the upholding of the dharma are intended to serve. This double aspect in the Gita's doctrine of avatarhood is apt to be missed by the cursory reader satisfied, as most are, with catching a superficial view of its profound teachings. And it is missed too by the formal commentator, petrified in the rigidity of the schools. So, this man rising into the divine nature and consciousness, this is often missed as the purpose of the avatar, of the reason why the avatar is born in humanity. Yet it is necessary, surely, to the whole meaning of the doctrine. Otherwise, the avatar idea would be only a dogma, a popular superstition, or an imaginative or mystic deification of historical or legendary supermen. Not what the Gita makes all its teaching. Not what the Gita makes all its teaching, which is a deep philosophical and religious truth and an essential part of or step to the supreme mystery of all, Rahasyam Uttamam. So, if there were not this rising of man into the Godhead, if there were not this rising of man into the Godhead to be helped by the descent of God into humanity, avatarhood, for the sake of dharma, would be an odious phenomenon. Since mere right, mere justice, or standards of virtue can always be upheld by the divine omnipotence through its ordinary means, by great men or great movements, by the life and work of sages and kings and religious teachers, without any actual incarnation. A very important point here. So, if this rising of man into the Godhead um, was not the would it is because of this second aim of the rising of man into Godhead, which is to be helped by the descent of God into humanity, and that avatarhood has its meaning and is not just an otious phenomenon for the sake of dharma, because dharma here Sri Aurobindo points out can also be maintained and upheld by great sages, by vibhutis, by collective movements. There are several ways. The divine himself does not have to come into a human birth to uphold it. This is what he's trying to say. Okay.
Amita, I had a question here. And the question being that when the avatar descends, uh, the power and the force of his divinity, not automatic is the wrong word to use. I don't know any other word to use, but doesn't that cause the power and force of his own divinity causes the souls which are ready to come into this? He's talking about the second birth of the soul. So it's like it's a catalyst for those who are
Yes,
ready on earth as soon as the
yes,
avatar. Yeah.
yes, it is because the avatar helps humanity, those souls that are ready to take that ascent upward. It is the descent of the avatar that helps them because they see in front of them a physical, material role model. And not only just a role model in a mental way, but a role model that has such great spiritual force at his command and is able to unleash that helps them to bring out their divinity and helps them to take that difficult ascent upwards, which otherwise human beings find it very, very difficult to do.
Yeah.
So, certainly that is true. Okay.
Thank
So,
you.
the avatar comes as the manifestation, right, without any actual. Let me read that again. Yes. Um, So if there were not this rising of man into the Godhead to be helped by the descent of God into humanity, Avatarhood, for the sake of dharma, would be an odious phenomenon, since mere right, mere justice, or standards of virtue can always be upheld by the divine omnipotence through its ordinary means, by great men of great movements, by the life and work of sages and kings and religious teachers, without any actual incarnation. What does Avatar come for? The Avatar comes as the manifestation of the divine nature in the human nature, the apocalypse of its Christhood, Krishnahood, Buddhahood, in order that the human nature may be may by molding its principle, thought, feeling, action, being on the lines of that Christhood, Krishnahood, Buddhahood, transfigure itself into the divine. So it is so this is it. He comes in order that the human nature may by molding its principal thought, feeling, action on the lines of that Christhood or Krishnahood or Buddhahood, transfigure itself into the divine. The law, the dharma, which the avatar establishes, is given for that purpose chiefly. The Christ, Krishna, Buddha stands in its center, stands in its center as the gate. He makes through himself the way men shall follow. So he becomes the gate, he makes through himself the way men shall follow. That is why each incarnation holds before men his own example and declares of himself that he is the way and the gate. So he makes each incarnation holds before men his own example and declares of himself that I am the way and the gate. He declares too the oneness of his humanity with the divine being, declares the Son of Man and the Father above, from whom he has descended, are one. That Krishna, in the human body, Manusim Tanum Tunam, what is it? Tanum Shritam, and the Supreme Lord and Friend of all creatures are but two revelations of the same divine Purushottam, revealed there in his own being, revealed here in the type of humanity. So he says the Son of Man and the Father are the one, and Krishna is in the human body and the Supreme Lord. And the friend of all creatures are but two revelations of the same divine Purushottam, revealed there in his own body as the avatar and as one that has and here revealed here in his own being, and here, friend of all creatures, are but two revelations of same divine Purushottam, revealed there in his own being, revealed here in the type of humanity, as another thing. That the Gita contains as its kernel. That the Gita contains as its kernel the second and real object of the Avatarhood is evident even from this passage by itself rightly considered. But it becomes much clearer if we take it not by itself, always the wrong way to deal with the text of the Gita, but in its right close connection with other passages and with the whole teaching. We have to remember, so this is in a quiet way, he's given the hint of how to read the Gita. He says, when you read the Gita, don't just take a passage just by itself, always see it in connection with other passages and in relationship with those. And then you get the larger and deeper meaning and the wider meaning of the whole. So, that the Gita contains as its kernel the second and real object of the Avatarhood is evident even from this passage by itself rightly considered. But it becomes much clearer if we take it not by itself, always the wrong way to deal with the text of the Gita, but in its right close connection with other passages and with the whole teaching. We have to consider and take together its doctrine of the one self in all, of the Godhead seated in the heart of every creature, its teaching about the relations between the Creator and His creation, its strongly emphasized idea of the Vibhuti, noting too the language in which the teacher gives his own divine example of selfless works, which applies equally to the human Krishna and the divine Lord of the worlds, and giving their due weight to such passages as that in the 9th chapter. What is the such passage in 9th? Deluded minds despise me, lodged in the human body, because they know not my supreme nature of being. So deluded mind despise me lodged in the human body, because they know not my supreme nature of being, Lord of all existences. And we have to read in the light of these ideas, this passage we find before us and its declaration that by the knowledge of his divine birth and divine work, men come to the divine. And by becoming full of him, and even as he, and taking refuge in him, they arrive at his nature and status of being. Madbhavam for Madhavam. Madbhavam. No. Madhav. Madhbhavam. Madhbhav. Madhbhav.
Madbhavam.
Madbhavam. That's what it is. Because it's that's
It's
because it's a
Madbhavam, my feeling, my spirit.
my spirit, yeah.
Madbhavam.
Exactly. It's not Madhavan, it's Madhbhavam.
Huh.
So, even as he and taking refuge in him, they arrive at his nature and status of being. Okay? Madhbhavam. That is as I am, right?
Yes.
But then we shall understand the divine birth and its object, not as an isolated and miraculous phenomenon, but in its proper place in the whole scheme of the world's manifestation. So only then we shall understand the divine birth and its object, not as an isolated and miraculous phenomenon, but in its proper place in the whole scheme of the world manifestation. So there is what he's trying to say is that this chapter on the possibility and purpose of avatarhood and the manifestation of the avatar of the divine, the divine, total divine consciousness in a human being is not just to be seen as a miraculous manifestation, something that one, is bedazzled by, but has no relevance to the evolution of humanity. It is directly for that purpose that the avatar, that the divine takes on a human body. So here it's very clear. But then we should understand the divine birth and its object, not as an isolated and miraculous phenomenon, but in its proper place in the whole scheme of the world manifestation. Without that, we cannot arrive at its divine mystery, but shall either scout it altogether or accept it ignorantly and it may be superstitiously, or fall into the petty and superficial ideas of the modern mind about it, by which it loses all its inner and helpful significance.
Can you please explain, Amita,
Hmm.
this idea of the vibhuti that he's talking about? He says it's strongly emphasized idea of the vibhuti. What does Sri Aurobindo mean by that?
So, what does he mean by that, Anuradha? Of the strongly idea of the vibhuti in the Gita that Sri Aurobindo points out here. He says that the, of the Godhead seated in the heart of every creature, it's teaching about the relations between the Creator and His creation. It strongly emphasized idea of the vibhuti, noting to the language in which the teacher gives his own divine example of selfless works. So you see, in the Gita there is a strongly emphasized idea of the vibhuti, as is also in Sri Aurobindo's own letters of yoga and several other places. But in the Gita, is there any specific reference to the vibhuti in particular? Or does he mean it as a synonym for avatar? Yeah.
Yes, I think in this context, I think that is
In
what
this
he's meaning is
context,
when he's
yeah.
representing himself, he's incarnating himself in the human form, and that
Mm.
is really as an example of for the rest of human beings of how to be.
Correct.
So going through the human experience, like I think the difference is with, for example, if you have the avatara like the Narasimha avatara, they are just incarnations to complete a certain task. They are not people who've gone through the human experience and then arrived at the divinity within the human experience. A vibhuti is very typically a part which has come down for a specific purpose within the human incarnation.
Yeah, in a human body,
In a human,
not the other avatars which were non-human or
not
semi-human,
necessarily human. Yes, yes, yes.
in this sense, huh? But the vibhuti is completely is actually a different concept, huh? It's separate to the avatar, and the way that Sri Aurobindo discusses it in several other places has a different meaning and connotation. I'm not going into that right now. I'm only explaining how it is in in this particular passage. It's been put in this way. Okay, so for to the modern mind, avatarhood is one of the most difficult to accept or to understand of all the ideas that are streaming in from the East upon the rationalized human consciousness. So we do find it even today, difficult to accept the idea of the avatar, that there is actually the divine in a human body, complete divine consciousness, and a manifestation of the divine. They say, what nonsense. You people are, imagining just because you are followers or devotees or disciples of a particular, and everybody likes to make avatars of several people who are non-avataric. So there's a distinction between how, some people have made avatars which are not avatars. So how do you know what is an avatar is also very important. So it is very difficult to firstly accept this, and even if you accept it, the tendency to to use it in a, and to make avatars of people that are not avatars is also very common. Okay. For the modern mind, avatarhood is one of the most difficult to accept or to understand of all the ideas that are streaming in from the East upon the rationalized human consciousness. It is apt to take it as at the best for a mere figure, for some high manifestation of human power, character, genius, great work done for the world or in the world, and at the worst to regard it as a superstition, to the heathen as a foolishness, and to the Greeks as stumbling blocks. So you see, this is what an avatar is generally defined as. We can decide which side of the definition people are. And that is why there's a difference between the avatar and the vibhuti. Actually, the vibhuti is in the human greatness of almost a divine kind of stature, but it's not an avatar. Like a Napoleon or what are the great vibhutis?
Sri
Swami
Ramakrishna.
Vivekananda,
Sri Ramakrishna, I think was his.
Ramakrishna was a partial. Yes, so they sometimes are called partial avatars or they're called vibhutis. Swami Vivekananda. It's also great Vibhuti. Several others.
Guru Nanak and all would also
have
be
been- Hmm?
Christ,
Sorry?
Guru Nanak. They would Christ, Guru Nanak, they would all come to
Christ
that
Aurobindo
avatar.
is
Okay.
clearly
I think
mentioned.
I think one of the significant differences with Vibhuti, it would be that they come for a specific purpose. They
They
come
come
to
for a particular action. Yeah.
uh-huh. But the
And they
avatar
come.
would be a change of consciousness. Like they're the next
Totally.
level of a change of consciousness, no?
Yeah, they come for
Something
yeah,
in between.
exactly. A huge change of upheaval into, and also they come when there's complete disorder in the
Ah,
dharmic, like in the Hitler and all these forces that were coming to destroy the world. So they almost come to save the world, whether it's a Sri Krishna or a Hitler or a, I mean, sorry, the Ravana or a Hitler or a what is that other chap? Um, the Duryodhana.
Hiranyakashipu. Hiranyakashipu.
Yeah, them, yeah.
Could we say
Sorry.
that the avatar comes to change the age and the change of a yuga?
Hmm?
The avatar comes to change the yuga, to
Yes, they
change
come
the
to this.
age.
Yes, absolutely. Changes from one yuga to the other. One way of being. Yuga is also normally they do come in different yugas. They don't. I've very seldom heard of two avatars in the same yuga. So they're in a way you're right. It does come to change from one level to another. So the mental level was established, of morality and so on by Sri Ram, and then the Krishna brought in the level of the overmental, which was the idea that dharma is and morality are two different things, and sometimes you can for the dharmic good you could um, exceed and compromise or
Morality.
so-called morality. And then Sri Krishna, and of course then Sri Aurobindo comes for the supramental, which is above the overmind, which is that there is a completely new consciousness that can divinize human beings and also divinize matter towards what they call is immortality. Okay, so um, let's continue. The materialist necessarily cannot even look at it, since he does not believe in God. So for the materialist to accept the idea and concept of avatarhood is very difficult. So he cannot even look at this idea, since he does not believe in God. So avatarhood means you have to believe in some great divine power or energy. If you don't believe in it, then there's no avatar for you. To the rationalist or the deist, it is a folly and a thing of derision. To the thoroughgoing dualist who sees an unbridgeable gulf between the human and the divine nature, it sounds like a blasphemy. So these are the different uh, attitudes towards avatarhood, and these are absolutely true. You cannot have a conversation with a lot of people on this without having a major uh, argument, right? So. Uh, To the thoroughgoing dualist who sees an unbridgeable gulf between the human and the divine nature, it sounds like a blasphemy. The rationalist objects that if God exists, he is extra cosmic. Okay. So, what is the rationalist view? That if God exists at all, he is extra cosmic, outside of the world, or supracosmic, and does not intervene in the affairs of the world, but allows them to be governed by a fixed machinery of law. He is, in fact, a sort of far off constitutional monarch or spiritual king log, at the best, an indifferent, inactive spirit behind the activity of nature, like some generalized or abstract witness, Purusha of the Sankhyas. He is pure spirit and cannot put on a body, infinite and cannot be finite as the human being is finite, the ever unborn creator and cannot be the creature born into the world. These things are impossible even to his absolute omnipotence. To these objections, the thoroughgoing dualist would add that God is in his person, his role, and his nature different and separate from man. The perfect cannot put on human imperfection. The unborn personal God cannot be born as a human personality. The ruler of the worlds cannot be limited in a nature bound human action and in a perishable human body. These objections, so formidable at first sight to the reason, seem to have been present to the mind of the teacher in the Gita, when he says that although the divine is unborn, imperishable in his self existence, the Lord of all beings, yet he assumes birth by a supreme sort, by a supreme resort to the action of his nature and by force of his self-maya, that he whom the deluded despise because lodged in a human body is verily in his supreme being the Lord of all, that he is in the action of the divine consciousness, the creator of the fourfold law, and the doer of the works of the world, and at the same time, in the silence of the divine consciousness, the impartial witness of the works of his own nature. For he is always beyond both the silence and the action, the supreme Purushottama. And the Gita is able to meet all these oppositions and to reconcile all these contraries because it starts from the Vedantic view of existence, of God and the universe. So, what is the Vedantic view, existence of God and the universe? It starts from there. So therefore, it's able to reconcile all these oppositions and to meet all these contraries and, to bring them all together. Because it starts from the Vedantic view. Sarvam idam Brahman. And what are the other Vedantic uh, utterances?
One is there are something known as the four Mahavakyas, the four main
Hmm.
sentences. So one is Aham Brahma Asmi.
Yes.
The other one is Tat Twamasi, you are also that.
Tattvamasi.
The third one is Ayam Atma Brahma, that the self, the individual self and the supreme self are one. Ayam Atma Brahma. The fourth one is Prajnanam Brahma, that
Okay.
knowledge, that highest knowledge is also Brahma.
Hmm.
So these are the four Mahavakyas.
Yes. Mahavakyas, and basically the idea that this is all part of the divine is, and it is, I am the divine, I am in the world, everything is me. So that idea is where the Gita begins, and therefore it is able to reconcile, unlike so many other philosophies that pose a division between the divine and the world, matter and spirit, and so on. The Gita does not have those issues.
So this one is actually posited again. So this Advaita Vada, normally the Advaita is this, that everything is Brahma, versus this Purusha idea, what he's talking about. So that is a Sankhya, which is talking of the duality of the absolute, where it's talking of a witness consciousness, which is conscious and plural. In Brahman, it's a single one. There's a single Brahman consciousness, which has the appearance of many. In the Sankhya, there is the Purusha, which is many witness consciousness, because each one, and Prakriti is ignorant.
One.
She is one, but she's ignorant. And
That's
it is
right.
their combination that gives rise to the creation.
Creation. But in the Gita, the Gita is able to reconcile both these together.
Yes. Yes.
So these are the contraries
Anuradha?
and oppositions. What do you mean by the contraries and oppositions of the Gita?
The Gita is able to meet all these oppositions and to reconcile all these contraries. These are the contraries.
So I
What are the
think the
oppositions?
contrast here is the fact that you have Sri Krishna is presenting himself as a god. So there is an image of, normally all of this comes into the dualistic kind of a philosophy, where you have a god, and typically in the Vaishnava traditions, you cannot become Krishna. You will always adore Krishna. It's very similar to the monotheistic thing, that you cannot become that supreme being. But in the Gita, he's talking of the fact that essentially we are that consciousness as well. So while Krishna is a supreme consciousness, but he's none other than us at the same time.
Anuradha, can you please put the 4 Vakyas in the WhatsApp group?
Could you write those down? Okay.
Yes,
Yeah,
I've
so
read
you
that.
know, we read in the earlier chapters the contraries. How the first few chapters are all about the different Sankhya and Yoga. This is two different schools of thought that the Gita brings together and how it does it. So these are the different oppositions and reconciliations that the Gita does because it starts from the Vedantic view of existence of God and the universe. Now, for in the Gita, um, for in the Vedantic view of things, all these apparently formidable objections are null and void from the beginning. The idea of the avatar is not indeed indispensable to its scheme, but it comes in naturally into it as a perfectly rational and logical conception. For all here is God, is the spirit or self existence. So, this is the Vedantic view. For all here is God, is the spirit of self existence. So, therefore, the idea of avatar, though it's not indeed indispensable to its scheme, it comes in naturally into it. It's perfectly rational and logical to its conception of uh, of of the universe. For all here is God. It is the spirit of self-existence. Is Brahman. So all here is Brahman. Ekam eva adi with aditva. There is nothing else. There is nothing else
Ekam,
but God.
so ekameva advitiyam. There is no two.
Advityam.
Advitiyam, no two-ness. Ekam eva advitiyam.
Advityam. So this is the opposite of this Advaita.
Dvitiyam. No, no,
Yeah,
no,
there.
no, no.
Huh?
Dvitiyam means two. Dvitiyam.
Two.
So
Yeah, so there is no
e-
two.
ekam eva. So there's one only.
There's one.
Advitiyam. It doesn't have a second.
It doesn't have a second. Okay.
Ha.
Oops. Mongo. Hmm. Um, is Brahman. There is nothing else, nothing other and different from it. And there can be nothing else. Can be nothing other and different from it. Um, there is nothing else, nothing other and different from it, and there can be nothing else. Can be nothing other and different from it. Nature is and can be nothing else than a power of the divine consciousness. All being are, all beings are and can be nothing else than inner and outer, subjective and objective, soul forms and bodily forms of the divine being, which exist in or result from the power of its consciousness. Far from the infinite being unable to take on finiteness, the whole universe is nothing else but that. We can see, look as we may, nothing else at all in the whole wide world we inhabit. Far from the spirit being incapable of form or disdaining to connect itself with form of matter or mind, and to assume a limited nature or a body. All here is nothing but that. The world exists only by that connection, that assumption. So this is what the Vedantic view of things is, which is in line with the idea of avatarhood, and therefore is logical and rational. That if one perceives and conceives of the universe and the world as one consciousness, and there being no separation, and that the divine infinite can become the divine finite, and that uh, the soul forms the subjective and objective soul forms and bodily forms of the divine being, which exist in or result from the power of its consciousness. All of this, that nature is and can be nothing else than the power of the divine consciousness. Prakriti is nothing but the power of the divine consciousness. All beings are nothing, inner and outer, subjective and objective, but the divine being, which exists in or results from the power of its consciousness. Far from the infinite being unable to take on finiteness, the whole universe is nothing else but that. We can see, look as we may, nothing else at all in the whole world, nothing else in the whole wide world we inhabit, far from the spirit being incapable of form. So the spirit is often known as incapable. Spirit is formless, right? But it's saying far from the spirit being incapable of form, it can take on any form, or disdaining to connect itself with form of matter or mind and to assume a limited nature or a body. All here is nothing but that. That is, all here is nothing but the spiritual consciousness, which has taken on a body, mind, and matter. Okay? So, all here is nothing but that. The world exists only by that connection, that assumption, far from the world being a mechanism of law with no soul or spirit intervening in the movement of its forces or the action of its minds and bodies. Only some original indifferent spirit passively existing somewhere, outside or above it. The whole world, every particle of it, is on the contrary nothing but the divine force in action. And that divine force determines and governs its every movement, inhabits its every form, possesses here every soul and mind. All is in God, and in Him moves and has its being. In all He is, acts and displays His being. Every creature is the disguised Narayan. So this last line, every creature is the disguised Narayan. Wonderful. This is the whole Vedic Vedantic conception. This is what the Gita starts from. And therefore it flows very, very naturally that the divine being takes on a human body, but is the complete divine consciousness that has entered into a finite body for a purpose. Okay, so far from the unborn being unable to assume birth, all beings are, even in their individuality, unborn spirits, eternal without beginning or end, and in their essential existence and their universality, all are the one unborn spirit, of whom birth and death are only a phenomenon of the assumption and change of forms. So here we go again. This is it's like a raga, the same alap comes back. And the reason why Sri Aurobindo keeps repeating in different ways this thing, because it's a very, very important idea which needs to completely enter into our own consciousness. Yes. Far from the unborn being, unable to assume birth, all beings are, even in their individuality, unborn spirits, eternal without beginning or end, and in their essential existence and their universality, all are the one unborn spirit, of whom birth and death are only a phenomenon of the assumption and change of forms. The assumption of imperfection by the perfect is the whole mystic phenomenon of the universe. So, this assumption of imperfection by the perfect is the whole mystic phenomenon of the universe. But the imperfection appears in the form and action of the mind or body assumed, subsists in the phenomenon. In that which assumes it, there is no imperfection. In that which assumes it, which assumes this mind or body, there is no imperfection. Even as in the sun which illumines all, there is no defect of light or of vision, but only in the capacities of the individual organ of vision. So just as the sun which illumines all, there is no defect of light or of vision, but the defect of light and vision come only in the capacities of the individual organ of vision. In the same way, the in the perfect, assuming body of imperfection, the imperfection comes because of the body that is imperfect and the capacities of the body that still need to evolve and transmute and transform. But that which has come into the body is perfect. That is what is being said here. So So even as the sun which illumines all, there is no defect of light or of vision, but only in the capacities of the individual organ of vision. Nor does God rule the world from some remote heaven, but by his intimate omnipresence. Each finite working of force is an act of infinite force, and not of a limited, separate, self-existent energy, laboring in its own underived strength. Very, very interesting, very important. So just as the world is not ruled from some remote heaven by a remote control, but by his intimate omnipresence in the world. Each finite working of force is an act of infinite force and not of a limited, separate, self-existent energy laboring in its own underived strength. In every finite working of will and knowledge, we can discover in every finite working of will and knowledge, we can discover supporting it an act of the infinite all will and all knowledge. God's rule is not an absentee, foreign, and external government. He governs all because he exceeds all, but also because he dwells within all movements and is their absolute soul and spirit. So God's rule is not an absentee, foreign and external government. He governs all because he exceeds all, yes, but also because he dwells within all movements, all forces, everything, and is their absolute soul and spirit. Therefore, none of the objections opposed by our reason to the possibility of avatarhood can stand in their principle. For the principle is a vain division made by the intellectual reason, which the whole phenomenon and the whole reality of the world are busy every moment contradicting and disproving. Is that clear? Any comments, thoughts, ideas? But still,
Yeah, I
apart from
was
the
just,
yes, go ahead.
we were watching a television program yesterday, and one of the things that they showed was how ants, this is in the Amazon, these ants actually take care of each other. If they're wounded in a battle, the ants actually help heal the other ants. And I was thinking, when you think about the intelligence and that's present everywhere, there's no place in creation where this intelligence, supreme intelligence, is not operating in a way that is sophisticated beyond our capability and our technology even today. And it's so evident everywhere when you look at creation that there is an intelligence and a supreme spirit motivating everything.
Yes, absolutely.
It's not by
And that's
accident.
not by accident. It is the infinite in the finite. It is that can become finite, that can reduce itself, but yet because it governs everything and is within everything, it can by its infinite power and its intelligence uh, organize the what they call is the next level or the next species. So that intelligence is the divine intelligence that is governing the universe. Right. So, and not the rational, the way that we look at it, which is saying the principle is a vain division made by the intellectual reason that, well, because the divine is infinite, is immaterial. Therefore, how can it become finite and material? So these kinds of so-called reasons have become obsolete when one begins to observe the whole phenomenon and the whole reality of the universe, whether in plants or in insects or in the world. So, therefore, none of the objections opposed by a reason to the possibility of avatarhood can stand in their principle, for the principle is a vain division made by the intellectual reason. which by the whole phenomenon and the whole reality of the world are busy every moment contradicting and disproving. But still, apart from the possibility, there is the question of the actual divine working. Whether actually the divine consciousness does appear coming forward from beyond the veil to act at all directly in the phenomenon. So there is the question of the actual divine work, whether actually the divine consciousness appears coming forward from behind the veil to act at all directly in the phenomenon, the finite, the mental, the material, the limited, the imperfect. The finite is indeed nothing but a definition, a face value of the infinite's self-representation. So here is the definition of what is finite. So what he says, actually, if you look at what is finite and finite in the world, you will see it is nothing more, is indeed nothing but a definition of face value of the infinite's self-representations to its own variations of consciousness. The real value of each finite phenomenon is an infinite value, is indeed the very infinite. So if you look at the real value of each finite phenomenon, it is an infinite value. It is indeed the very infinite. Now, this actual divine working, what he says, whether it actually comes forward, does the divine consciousness appear and come forward from behind the veil to act at all directly in the phenomenal, the finite, the mental, material, limited, and imperfect is the question. Then he says, well, actually, what is the finite? Finite is actually the face value of the infinite. Because if you look behind that, the value from where the finite comes, you will come back to the infinite. So it is the real value of each finite phenomenon is an infinite value, is indeed the very infinite. Each being is infinite in its self-existence. Okay? Each being is infinite in its self-existence, whatever it may be in the action of its phenomenal nature. Its temporal self-representation. So there is it's infinite in its self-existence, Sat. However, it may be in its action, in its chit, in its consciousness of action of its phenomenal nature, its temporal self-representation. The man is not, when we look closely, himself alone, a rigidly separate self-existent individual, but humanity in a mind and body of itself. And humanity, too, is no rigidly separate self-existent species or genus. It is the all-existence, the universal Godhead figuring itself in the type of humanity. There it works out certain possibilities, develops, evolves, as we now say, certain powers of its manifestations. What it evolves is itself, what it evolves is itself, is the spirit. So what evolves is actually itself the spirit. The spirit is in its evolution is what we call as uh, um, life. So let's read again the last bit. What he's saying here is the man is not, when we look closely, himself alone, a rigidly separate self-existence. So man is not a rigidly separate self-existent individual, but man or the individual is humanity in a mind and body of itself. And humanity too is no rigidly separate self-existent species or genus. What is humanity? It is the all existence, the universal Godhead, figuring itself in the type of humanity. There it works out certain possibilities, develops, evolves, as we now say, certain powers of its manifestations. What it evolves is itself. is the spirit. So what it evolves is itself the spirit that is within the infinite spirit that has become the finite and has created the mind and the body and this and the emotions and everything else. Then is evolves itself out back into the divine. For what we mean by spirit, now again, what is spirit then? For what we mean by spirit is self-existent being with an infinite power of consciousness and unconditioned delight in its being. So what we mean by spirit is Satchidananda, right? Uh, so this spirit is, what is it that when we say what it evolves is itself is the spirit? So it evolves itself out. For what we mean by spirit is it is self-existent being, Sat, with an infinite power of consciousness, Chit, and unconditioned delight, Ananda, in its being. It is either that or nothing, or at least nothing which has anything to do with man and the world, or with which, therefore, man or the world has anything to do. So what does this mean? Can you explain that, Anuradha?
Here when we are saying, so it's this line, no, where we are saying for what we mean by the spirit, that is what you said, it is either
Yes.
that or nothing,
Or
or at
yes,
least nothing which has anything to do with man and the world, or with which, therefore, man or the world has nothing to do with,
has anything to do.
has anything to do. So when it's saying that, because from a Bharatiya perspective, at the foundation of everything, there is this supreme consciousness, which is qualified by Sat, Chit, and Ananda, as you said.
Yes,
So
and
it
which
is,
evolves then into mind, body, and uh,
yes. So it says it
in
is
its
either that
lower.
or it is non-existing. That is what he basically means.
Hmm,
That if it is within this range of existence, then it has to be of the quality of the spirit, essentially,
yes,
fundamentally.
essential,
So
fundamentally.
that's what he's saying, that if it is either that or nothing, means it doesn't it has not come into
Then
manifestation, it doesn't exist.
yes, yes, it
There is
all
no
doesn't
difference
exist.
from our
So if the
perspective.
next line qualifies that body, matter, body is only a masked motion of force, of conscious being, employed as a starting point for the variable relations of consciousness, working through its power of sense. Nor is matter anywhere really void of consciousness. For even in the atom, the cell there is, as is now made abundantly clear in spite of itself by modern science, power of will. So even in the atom, the cell is a power of the will and intelligence at work. But that power is the power of will and intelligence of the self, spirit, or Godhead within it. It is not the separate, self derived will or idea of the mechanical cell or atom. So he's making that distinction, of course, which now modern science has very, very clearly demonstrated, and which also explains why the intelligence of the ants work as a collective body when it comes to self-preservation and to developing, have these wonderful cognitive, intuitive ways of preserving their own species. So we do it
Yes.
also. This is because it is the divine power that is within them.
Yes.
Sorry?
Amita, can I also share that the one that I told you about, looking at yourself at the mirror through the different lenses? Because
Yes,
if one
yes.
does that, so for example, if I'd request everybody to think about this as an example. So if you're looking at oneself as such in a mirror, we would see the material form, the matter that we're talking about. But if you then change the lens and we look at ourselves through an X-ray lens, then we will see the bones, which is also a parallel reality. If we go deeper into the cells of our body, we will find, through a microscope, we will find the microscopic, in the sense, the bacterial, the cellular reality of our essence. But then if we take a quantum lens and dive deep into our own materiality, we arrive at a infinite consciousness quantum existence where we are Because if you look in, then there's much more space.
If you
So
look at Kirlian, the Kirlian photography, it shows you light. It shows you
yes,
different images of light. So you become different colors of light and those
yes.
images.
But then if you go into the quantum and you're really diving deep into the
Mm.
the
Cell.
spaces of your atoms,
Mm.
then we see that there is a consciousness that is there. And because we're looking at ourselves, we are aware. And
Yeah.
because we are everywhere, it's very hard with that quantum lens to see differences. Then we realize that we are essentially consciousness, bliss, and
Yes.
existence.
So then you come back to Satchidanand, which is what he started with.
Yes.
For what we mean by spirit is self-existent being, with an infinite power of consciousness and unconditioned delight in its being. And then he goes on, that matter body is only a massed motion of force of conscious being, employed as a starting point for the variable relations of consciousness working through its power of sense. Nor is matter anywhere really void of consciousness. For even in the atom, the cell, there is, as is now made abundantly clear, in spite of itself by modern science, power of will. There is a power of will. There is an intelligence at work in the cell. But that power is the power of will and intelligence of the self with a capital S, the self that is the spirit, Satchidananda, or Godhead within it. It is not the separate self-derived will or idea of the mechanical cell or atom. This universal will and intelligence involved develops its powers from form to form. And on earth, at least, it is in man that it draws nearest to the full divine, and there first becomes, even in the outward intelligence in the form, obscurely conscious of its divinity. So, man being the highest uh, form of its evolutionary, what should I say, form. So, the universal will and intelligence is involved, therefore, in everything and develops its powers from form to form, and on earth at least, it is man or humanity that draws nearest to its full divine and there first becomes, even in the outward intelligence, in the form, obscurely conscious of its divinity. But still there too, there is a limitation. There is that imperfection of the manifestation which prevents the lower forms from having the self knowledge of their identity with the divine. So, there is, of course, the limitation here too. And what is the limitation? There is the imperfection of the manifestation which prevents the lower forms from having the self knowledge of their identity with the divine. So that imperfection is because the lower forms do not have that knowledge of that they are actually one already with the divine, their identity with the divine. For in each limited being, the limitation of the phenomenal action is accompanied by a limitation also of the phenomenal consciousness which defines the nature of the being and makes the inner difference between creature and creature. The divine works behind indeed and governs its special manifestation through this outer and imperfect consciousness and will, but is itself secret in the cavern, Guhayam, as the Veda puts it, or as the Gita expresses it. In the heart of all existences, the Lord abides, turning all existences as if mounted on a machine by mile. Very famous line. What is the Sanskrit? In the heart of all existences, the Lord abides, turning all existences as if mounted on a machine by mile, as if mounted on a machine by mile. The secret working of the Lord, hidden in the heart, from the egoistic nature consciousness through which he works, is God's universal method with creatures. So, what is God's universal method with creatures? The secret working of the Lord hidden in the heart from the egoistic nature consciousness through which he works. So, the outer consciousness of man is egoistic and it works through the ego. So, the secret working of the Lord hidden in the heart from the egoistic nature consciousness through which he works is God's universal method with creatures. Why then should he suppose that in any form, why then should we suppose that in any form he comes forward into the frontal, the phenomenal consciousness for a more direct and consciously divine action? So then, if this is the way that the divine works through the ego, through the external consciousness, hidden in the heart of man, then why should we suppose that he would come out, uh, from behind his veil, and and so on? So this is the question he's asking. Far from the unborn being unable to assume birth, all beings are even in their individuality unborn spirits. Okay, skip to page. No. Yes. So he's asking this question that why then should we suppose that in any form he comes forward into the frontal, the phenomenal consciousness for a more direct and consciously divine action? Obviously, if at all, if he does come forward out of his veil, out of the egoistic frontal consciousness, then it is obviously comes out to break the veil between himself and humanity, which man limited in his own nature, but never left. So it is to break this veil between himself and humanity, this veil that is otherwise so strong, and which man by himself cannot lift, which is the veil of his frontal egoistic consciousness, that the divine takes on the avatar, becomes the avatar, comes in without that veil as the pure divine avatar. For men and for us to see that this is possible, that here is in front of us the ultimate leader, the ultimate role model of what we prototype of what we can become and should become. So the Gita explains the ordinary imperfect. We'll take this up next time now. But I think the main central idea that we read today is this idea of why the avatar, why should there be an avatar? Why should the divine take on a human form? For what purpose? And of course, very simple, it is for upholding the dharma of the world and several other things, but he says much more important and far more significant, and which also explains why the dharma of the world can be upheld is that he comes there to show humanity, who is his apex of evolutionary consciousness and somewhat conscious of the divine, that there is a possibility of becoming divine in humanity. There's a possibility and way forward to ascend out of the lower nature of his egoistic consciousness, which is the veil that separates him from the full divine consciousness, and the way to do it. And when he sees the full manifestation of the divine in the figure of the avatar, he is given the hope and the method and the way forward and the inspiration and aspiration to become like that.
I wanted to.
Yes, please.
Figure 49. We had one such discussion on Christianity, and there was one line which was described that no man, that Jesus Christ said that no man may pass except through me. If somebody objected to it. And today, actually, this line has again discovered that.
So here Sri Krishna is also saying that I am the way, I am the
So
method.
49 is we declare as that number
49, page 49,
149.
page 149, yeah.
And we say that is why each incarnation puts man in his own example and declares of himself that he is the way and the gate. So that gate, so that's exactly that line which Christ has also said.
Yeah.
That he is the gate.
Yeah, so that is the purpose of the avatar, to be that gate and to be that way. Yeah. The only thing is that exclusivity, when it becomes the only gate and the only way, which is what men do, not the avatar himself doesn't do it. It is what men formalize as religion and the rigidity that comes after many centuries.
Because he was in that particular place in Judea and at least I think that our Hindu culture also was not in that particular area, but in I think maybe was
So, not even our avatars are saying that I am the way. Sri Krishna says, if you want to come, follow me, I am I am doing selfless actions. So all the avatars say that, but that doesn't matter. They don't say it's the exclusive way. There are different ways. Hmm. Yes, anything more?
That was a very inspiring class. Thank you.
I was thinking that reality, as you were reading this, I was thinking that this reality is really very much like a dream. That in a dream, we can dream something and it appears very real. And this world, we tend to think of this world as having physical substance, and that's the kind of the baseline of everything, and we analyze that, and everything grows from there. Whereas when you look at it from the quantum reality side, it's consciousness that causes this physical world to be. And if you change the consciousness, the physical world is going to change, just like a dream. So the stuff that's in our subliminal world causes the dream to come into being. The stuff that we have in our consciousness causes this physical world to be the way it is. So if we want to change, and that's what the avatars do, is they give us the example, the pattern of how to be. And if we follow that, then perfection can happen in this physical world. And I think that's the big key, is if we can make that connection, be clear about that, and actually be functional about that in the world, in our lives, in our mind, in our internal life, then we've made a big transition. We've made a big accomplishment.
Yes, and what makes it dysfunctional and why we lose that vision and that realization and that understanding is the ego. It keeps interfering in and then brings us back into the other way of consciousness, which is matter, material, and what is here, and everything else doesn't exist for the ego. It's the materiality of everything that exists.
Yeah,
So that is the problem
that's a
to
bit
get
of a
rid of.
nightmare.
Life.
Well, if I may, I think the good news in this is that all of these are parallelly coexisting realities. So while at one end there is the quantum reality, which is absolutely present, ever present, which is what the Mother and Shobana keep telling us, that the psychic reality is a ever present reality. Similarly, the ego reality is also a present reality, but as much reality as we choose to attribute to it in terms of
Yes.
patterns. So, which is the lens that we are choosing to wear in order to lead the lives that we are? That is the real challenge.
But also this forgetfulness, when we forget, when we enter into you see, the ego camouflages. So how you have to break out of the chrysalis of the ego. One can do it to a point in the mind, but it has to be something that goes beyond the mind that brings that, the conversion, that what Mother says, the turn of the hand.
Yeah.
And
But
then the
I think also
reality
that,
changes.
yeah, I think cognitively also, if we can keep the perspective of
Yes,
the
that
limited, but
helps.
actually just remind us that actually there's a much bigger game, then it can add a perspective in the weightage that we give to the limited material perception and action and behavior that emerges from there.
Hmm. So these are questions, and these are matters of great importance. Okay, with that, let us end and we shall meditate again. Remember and offer. So, last time we read a wonderful chapter on the possibility and purpose of avatarhood. Um, I think we can start where we left off. I'd just like to perhaps reread a little bit and then continue. We start from page 154. The Gita explains the ordinary, yes? Yes. Yes? Have we read that or no? No, we haven't. Okay. Hmm. Yes, I want to read from here because I think it's an extremely interesting point and very, very profound. That here, that in this chapter, Sri Aurobindo dwells on the purpose and possibility of avatarhood. So, and why the avatar has come on earth. But beyond that, he sort of describes the finite becoming the infinite and the infinite being the finite, and both actually being one with the divine. So we start from page 152, but still, apart from the possibility, there is the question of the actual divine working. Whether actually the divine consciousness does appear coming forward from beyond the veil to act at all directly in the phenomenal, the finite, the mental and the material, the limited, the imperfect. The finite is indeed nothing but a definition, a face value of the infinite's self-representations to its own variations of consciousness. The real value of each finite phenomenon is an infinite value, is indeed the very infinite. Each being is infinite in its self-existence, whatever it may be in the action of its phenomenal nature, its temporal self-representation. The man is not, when we look closely, himself alone, a rigidly separate, self-existent individual, but humanity in a mind and body of itself. And humanity, too, is no rigidly separate, self-existent species or genus. It is the all-existence. So man is not himself alone, a rigidly separate individual, but humanity in a mind and body. And humanity is not is no rigidly separate self-existent species, but it is the all existence, the universal Godhead. So what is humanity? The universal Godhead figuring itself in the type of humanity. There it works out certain possibilities, develops, evolves, as we now say, certain powers of its manifestations. What it evolves is itself, is the spirit. So this wonderful concept is 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 uh, is shared here about, you know, the idea that humanity itself is actually the universal Godhead, and man is not just what we think as a separate individual creature, but is a representative of humanity in a mind and body of itself. And then what it evolves is itself. So what does the humanity evolve? It evolves itself is the spirit, because it is the Godhead and spirit. For what we mean by spirit is self-existent being with an infinite power of consciousness and unconditioned delight in its being. So the spirit that he says, what it evolved itself is a spirit. What is spirit? The spirit is Sat Chit Anand. And that is what we mean by spirit is self-existent being Sat with an infinite power of consciousness Chit and unconditioned delight Anand in its being. It is either that or nothing, or at least nothing which has anything to do with man and the world, or with which, therefore, man or the world has anything to do. So, in a sense, what he's saying here is that man is Sat Chit Anand. Humanity is not a separate, self-existent species, but is the universal Godhead, figuring itself in humanity as a type, and that is humanity. And then he says, this spirit that is being evolved through humanity, in humanity, is nothing but Sat Chit Anand. So, for what we mean by spirit is self-existent being, power of consciousness, delight in its being. It is either that or nothing. So, spirit is either this or it is nothing, or at least nothing which has anything to do with man and the world, or with which, therefore, man or the world has anything to do. Matter, body, is only a masked motion of force, of conscious being. So then what is matter? See, this is a complete um, opposite of the definitions we are used to in ordinary scientific or otherwise in other parlance. What he's saying is matter then, if this is the way, if if man is nothing but this, an embodiment of humanity, humanity with a mind and body of itself, and humanity is nothing but the all existence and the universal Godhead, then what is evolving in humanity which is spirit, is nothing but Satchidananda. Then what he says is, well, if there is a spirit, and either it is nothing or it is Satchidananda. If it is Satchidananda, then matter with which the body is masked, because the body is composed of matter. Matter body is only a masked motion of force of conscious being, employed as a starting point for the variable relations of consciousness working through its power of sense. So then, matter is also nothing but, what is it? Chit, Sat. Because matter is a masked motion of force of conscious being. Yes. So matter is nothing but Chit, being employed as a starting point for the variable relations of consciousness working through its power of sense. So this variable relations of consciousness works through what? The senses. And what is matter? Matter is only a masked motion of force of conscious being. Because it says force of conscious being, it says it is a conscious being and force is chit, and conscious being is sat. So that is what is matter. The substance of matter is not inert, therefore. The substance of matter is not essentially unconscious, and matter is not the inconscience, which is what we normally think it is. But what Sri Aurobindo is saying is that actually, if you look deeper down, and if you take the veil of the Yoga Maya, which is covering matter, which is covering the outer being, which is the veiling the infinite from the finite, then you will see, once it's removed, that matter too is nothing but Sat Chit. And then matter, body, is only a masked motion, the force of conscious being, employed as a starting point for the variable relations of consciousness working through its power of sense. So this variable relations of consciousness working through its power of sense is how matter communicates through the senses. Nor is matter anywhere really void of consciousness, for even in the atom, the cell, there is as is now made abundantly clear in spite of itself by modern science, even in the atom, in the cell, there is a power of will and intelligence at work. That power is the power of will and intelligence of the cell. So what is this power of will and intelligence that scientists and science today is accepted, which is part of which informs or is part of matter, is in the very heart of the atom, in the cell itself. It is nothing but, again we go back, but that power is the power of will and intelligence of the self. And what is the self? The spirit, which is Satchidananda or Godhead within. So that is what is this power of intelligence and will, which is in the heart of matter, in the cell, in the atom. So Sat Chit Ananda is again present there, in the very, very smallest unit of matter. Now here, there is a reason why in this particular chapter, this is being explored. We'll come to that when he explains it later. Now, the cell there is, as is now made abundantly clear in spite of itself by modern science, power of will and intelligence at work, but that power is the power of the will and intelligence of the self, spirit, or Godhead within it. It is not the separate, self-derived will or idea of the mechanical cell or atom. So there is the difference. You know, they generally science tends to think that it has its own this has its own intelligence, but it does not relate this intelligence or accept the idea of the spirit, and therefore it says it's a self-derived will or idea of the mechanical cell or atom. That this is what is being disputed here, and Sri Aurobindo is saying very clearly, it is not the separate self-derived will or idea of the mechanical cell or atom. It is not mechanical, it is conscious. It is very, very much part of the spirit of this Satchidananda. This universal will and intelligence involved, okay? The universal will and intelligence involved develops its power from form to form. And on earth, at least, it is in man that it draws nearest to the full divine, and there first becomes, even in the outward intelligence in the form, obscurely conscious of its divinity. The universal will intelligence, which is involved, develops its powers from form to form, and on earth at least, it is in its full divine form, it comes out in man. So, at least it is in man that it draws nearest to the full divine, and there first becomes, even in the outward intelligence, in the form itself, securely conscious of its divinity. But still there too, there is a limitation. What is the limitation? There is that imperfection of the manifestation which prevents the lower forms from having the self-knowledge of their identity with the divine. The imperfection is the lower forms of man, our lower nature, our outer nature, our imperfect, our nature, which is the mind, vital, and body, is unable to have of identity with the divine. It prevents so. What is the so there too there is a limitation. There is that imperfection of the manifestation which prevents the lower forms from having the self-knowledge of their identity with the divine. So we don't have that self-knowledge of complete identity with the divine. For in each limited being, the limitation of the phenomenal action is accompanied by a limitation also of the phenomenal consciousness, which defines the nature of the being and makes the inner difference between creature and creature. The divine works behind indeed and governs its special manifestation through this outer and imperfect, but is itself secret in the cavern. The divine works behind and governs its special manifestation through this outer and imperfect consciousness and will, but is itself, the divine itself, is secret in the cavern, guham, guhayam, as the Veda puts it, or as the Gita expresses it, in the heart of all existences. The Lord abides, turning all existences as if mounted on a machine by Maya. This is very, very important. This secret working of the Lord, hidden in the heart from the egoistic nature consciousness through which it works, is God's universal method with creatures. So what is God's universal method with creatures? It is the secret working of the Lord, hidden in the heart, in our heart, hidden from the egoistic nature consciousness, hidden from our outer nature consciousness, which is the mental, vital, physical, that is three parts of the being, uh, and then of course the three modes of nature, the tamas, rajas, and sattva. So this secret working of the Lord, hidden in the heart from the egoistic nature consciousness through which he works, is God's universal method with creatures. Why then should we suppose that in any form he comes forward, that in any form he comes forward into the frontal, the phenomenal consciousness for a more direct and consciously divine action? So he asks, why then should we suppose that in any form he comes forward into the frontal, phenomenal consciousness for a more direct and consciously divine action? Obviously, if at all, if he does come forward into the frontal consciousness, it is then, if at all, then to break the veil. He comes to break the veil between himself and humanity, which man, limited in his own nature, would never lift. So this veil of consciousness, this veil of obscurity, this veil that separates our identity with the Godhead that sits within our heart, the secret Godhead, the divine being that resident in the heart of humanity, and therefore, as we are part of humanity, is resident in the heart of each human being, is resident in the heart of each human cell, is resident in the heart of each atom and each particle of matter. That divine being cannot, that veil between the outer nature and that cannot be rent, cannot be removed until there is a calling, and it is the divine alone that can remove it. It is very tough for human beings to remove it without doing some form of yoga, love, bhakti, calling the divine. And it is the divine then, the more we approach and we go closer to the divine self, the more that veil is rent. Until then, it is right out there, and we don't know, and we are not aware in our phenomenal outer consciousness of the divinity. Okay? Is that clear, this particular paragraph? Yes? Okay. Then I shall move forward. So obviously, he comes to the frontal phenomenal consciousness to break the veil between himself and humanity, which man, limited in his own nature, could never lift. The Gita explains the ordinary imperfect action of the creature by its subjection to the mechanism of Prakriti and its limitation by the self-representations of Maya. So the Gita explains the ordinary imperfect action of the creature by its subjection to the mechanism of Prakriti and its limitation by the self-representations of Maya. These two terms are only complementary aspects of one and the same effective force of divine consciousness. Maya is not essentially illusion. The element or appearance of illusion only enters in by the ignorance of the lower Prakriti. So here it is. He is now explaining what is Prakriti and what is Maya. This is actually there are only these two terms are complementary. And there are two aspects of the same effective force of divine consciousness. So basically what he's saying here is Maya and Prakriti are both part of Sat, of the divine consciousness, right? So these two terms are only complementary aspects of one and the same effective force of divine consciousness. Force of divine consciousness. Maya is not essentially illusion. We normally look at Maya as the meaning of Maya is illusion, but he says no, it's not illusion. The element or appearance of illusion only enters in like the ignorance of the lower Prakriti because of that veil. That is the veil of the ego, the veil of the outer nature, the veil that separates the divine and the outer phenomenal nature. Because of that veil of the Yoga Maya, that is why we perceive Maya to be illusion. But Maya is not illusion, he says. Maya is the element or appearance of illusion only enters in by the ignorance of the lower Prakriti. When we are in the lower Prakriti. Yeah, what is the lower Prakriti? Maya of the three modes of nature. What are the three modes of nature? Rajas, Sattva, and Tamas. Maya of the three modes of nature. It is the divine consciousness in its power of various self-representation of its being. So what is Maya? Maya is the divine consciousness in its power of various self-representation of its being, while Prakriti is the effective force of that consciousness. The Prakriti is the force of Maya, that consciousness which operates to work out each such self-representation according to its own law and fundamental idea, Swabhava and Swadharma, in its own proper quality and particular force of working, Guna Karma, leaning, pressing down on my own nature, Prakriti. I create, lose forth into various beings, all this multitude of existences, all helplessly subject to the control of nature. Those who know not the divine, lodged in the human body, are ignorant of it because they are grossly subject to this mechanism of Prakriti, helplessly subject to its mental limitations and acquiescent in them, and dwell in an asuric nature that deludes with desire and bewilders with egoism, the will and the intelligence. Mohinim prakritim shrutam. For the Purushottam within is not readily manifest to any and every being. So this is an extremely important concept, right? And this idea that and this consciousness that um, is being infused into the Gita, in which Sri Krishna is trying to explain to Arjuna, which Sri Aurobindo brings out beautifully in this chapter, is um, is something that we have to allow to permeate into our own consciousness, because It turns everything upside down. You know, it's it's like the roots of the banyan tree. Someone asked, "Where are the roots of the banyan tree?" And then the reply was, "Up in the sky." Well, but he said, "No, but they're right down in the earth." So no, they're not actually. They're up in the higher heavens. So it's the same thing. It's upside down. Everything that we think and everything that we've been taught and everything that we see through our senses, it's a lie. So what is a lie? Is our senses lying, or is this book lying? Is this knowledge a lie, or is our phenomenal perception of reality a lie? What is the truth? So, this is so important that it requires, I think, a contemplation that bridges into an experience or into a realization. Because only if you can realize one moment of what he is saying here, can one understand and really live a spiritual life. Because then one realizes that everything that one is the divine. That the divine is seated within us, the divine is us, the divine is the world, the divine is matter, the divine is in the cell, in the atom, in consciousness, there's nothing else but the divine. So that's why these these words like Sarvamidam Brahman or all these Mahavakyas that we spoke about last time, which were written down on the chat for you. These then don't become Mahavakya, something intellectual. They're reality. The falsehood is our senses. The falsehood is our perception of of not being able to see this, and the veil of consciousness that is impinged in the ego that does not allow us to break through and really experience and have that identity. But the more the consciousness loves the divine, the more the consciousness calls the divine, the more you are immersed in the divine, the more you feel it is the divine that is in you. It is the divine that is seated within. That is the divine that is all around. And then slowly everything changes. So this is something that I wanted to especially read, and I did not expect this in this particular chapter. I have to make a confession that this is the very first time I was reading this chapter also. So when I started reading it the last time, I got so immersed in it that I kept reading it every night. And I said, this is something that has not been written in the Life Divine. I read the Synthesis of Yoga. I read other works of Sri Aurobindo. He has put this only in the essays on the Gita. And what a phenomenal book this is. So if I had my way, I'd probably read this chapter about 10 times and stop here. Each time, each class, just read this again and read this again and read this again. Because it's very, very, very important. And see if you can get a sense of it. Now, so he says, pressing down upon my own nature, Prakriti, I create, lose forth into various being, all this multitude of existences, all helplessly subject to the control of nature. Those who know not the divine lodged in the human body are ignorant of it because they are grossly subject to this mechanism of Prakriti. What is this mechanism of Prakriti? Does anyone know? The mechanism of Prakriti, what is he referring to here? Yes,
The three gunas.
Yeah, so the mechanism of Prakriti is the three gunas, the force of nature, of lower Prakriti, which is the starting from the tamagun, satagun, and Rajagun and Satagun. So these three are these three gunas, and this mechanism of Prakriti holds us as slaves, as subject to it. We are not able to rise above it and are subject to it. Therefore, he says, those who know not the divine lodged in the human body are ignorant of it because they are grossly grossly subject to this mechanism of Prakriti, helplessly subject to its mental limitations, and acquiescent in them, and dwell in an asuric nature that deludes with desire, rajas, and bewilders with egoism, the will, and the intelligence. Mohinim prakritim sritaha. For the Purushottam within is not readily manifest to any and every being. Why? He conceals himself in a thick cloud of darkness or a bright cloud of light. Utterly he envelops and wraps himself in his yoga mind. Naham prakasha sarvasya yogamaya samavrita. So, all this world, says the Gita, because the Purushottam is why can we not see the divine seated within us? Why can we not see? Why can't we feel the divine seated within us? Why can't we see it? Why can't it become as real as you seeing me or me seeing you? Because he has wrapped himself in a dark cloud of darkness or a light or a cloud of light, either way, and he is hiding himself. Utterly he envelops and wraps himself in his yoga maya. All this world, says the Gita. Now, this beautiful shloka of the Gita. All this world, says the Gita, because it is bewildered by the three states of being. So, this world, because it is bewildered by the three states of being, determined by the modes of nature, fails to recognize me. What are the three states of being? Modes of nature we know. What are the three states of being? Mental, vital, physical, mind, body. So all this world, says the Gita, because it is bewildered by the three states of being, determined by the modes of nature. These three states of being are determined by the modes of nature, yes? Fails to recognize me. But this, my divine Maya of the modes of nature, is hard to get beyond. The Lord Himself is saying this. He's saying it's very hard to get beyond this. So, for this, my divine Maya, Sri Krishna Himself is telling this to Arjuna. For this, my divine Maya, the modes of nature, is hard to get beyond. Those cross beyond it, only those who cross beyond it, who approach me. Those cross beyond it who approach me. But those who dwell in the asuric nature of being have their knowledge reft from them by mind. So who are the ones who can cross me? Those who approach me. Those who approach me. They are the only ones who can cross beyond this veil, this dark veil, yoga mind. And how do you approach the divine? Through love, through bhakti, yes? Through aspiration, through concentration. Yes, but love, but karma through work, but work done with devotion. Anything done with devotion. Not just work done with it. Okay, so all this world, says the Gita, because it is bewildered by the three states of being, determined by the modes of nature, fails to recognize. But this, my divine Maya, the modes of nature, is hard to get beyond. Those cross beyond it who approach me, but those who dwell in the asuric nature of me. What is this asuric nature? Yes,
The,
Jeshri?
the lower vital and
Yes.
mental,
So,
the
I think it's the
senses and the mind, ego.
yes, Anuradha?
it's the nature guided by ego, as long as it is under the control of the. It can be the mind, it can be the physical, the
It
vital.
could be anything, yes. So it's the ego principle, it's the principle that of I-ness and minus and desires and self, that principle. So this is the asuric nature that is um, that has that does not allow, there's no room for anyone else but itself. It's self-centered. So where is the divine? There's no space for the divine. Okay, so for those who dwell in the asuric nature of being, have their knowledge reft from them by Maya. So what Maya is this? Not the Maya that we know.
The lower Maya.
No, the higher Maya.
Oh.
So, but those who dwell in the asuric nature of being have their knowledge reft from them by Maya. So that Maya is of what is its definition is given here. Maya is not essentially illusion. It is the element of appearance of illusion only enters in by the ignorance of the lower prakriti. Maya is of the three modes of nature. It is the divine consciousness and its power of various self-representations of its being. So those who dwell in the asuric nature of being have their knowledge taken away, reft from them by Maya. So this Maya is the one that creates the illusion of separation, but is actually the divine consciousness in its pure and its original self, which is not being which we don't see as that because we have the veil of the ego consciousness, and the outer nature veils that. So that Maya. So Maya would be um, uh, 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 let me say, with this, there's a capital M. So here. Mechanism of Prakriti and its limitation by the self-representation of Maya. So you have to read this first paragraph to understand what is Maya. Maya is not illusion. It is not what we think as a lower Prakriti. It only appears as lower Prakriti when we are caught in the three modes of nature, when we are subject to the three modes of nature. So so now when you read that, now you read this last sentence, and it says that all this world, says the Gita, because it is bewildered by the three states of being, determined by the modes of nature, fails to recognize me. For this my divine Maya, my divine Maya, same M, my divine Maya of the modes of nature is hard to get beyond. Those cross beyond it who approach me. But those who dwell in the asuric nature of being have their knowledge reft from them by Maya. In other words, there is the inherent consciousness of the divine in all. For in all the divine dwells. So, in other words, what Sri Krishna is saying is there is the inherent consciousness of the divine in all, for in all the divine dwells. But he dwells there, covered by his Maya. Okay? So the divine dwells there, covered by his Maya. And the essential self-knowledge of beings, the essential self-knowledge. Self-knowledge is that knowledge that can recognize the divine seated in us. Okay? So the essential self-knowledge of beings is reft from them. Okay? Let's read it again. In other words, there is the inherent consciousness of the divine in all, for in all the divine dwells. But he dwells there, covered by his Maya, and the essential self-knowledge of beings is reft from them, turned into the error of egoism by the action of Maya, the action of the mechanism of Prakriti. Still, by drawing back from the mechanism of nature to her inner and secret master, man can become conscious of the indwelling divinity. Okay? So, how does man become conscious of the indwelling divinity seated within him? By drawing back from the mechanism of nature, okay, to her inner and secret master, man can become conscious of the indwelling divinity. And how can man draw back from the mechanism of nature? By what?
By approaching the divine through.
Yes. Thank
Because
God.
where do you draw back into? It's like stepping back, which the mother talks about. Where
You only by
uh,
bhakti, by devotion, by self-giving, by surrender, by love, by that movement alone can one draw back from the mechanism of nature. You cannot draw back from the mechanism of nature by your mind, because your mind is a part of the mechanism of nature, and it's very important to understand that. And you could perhaps, those who could perhaps go to the higher mind, or the illumined mind, or the higher levels of mind, and have some sort of a control over the mechanism of nature, but it would be a partial control. Okay, that is possible, and it may be a first step. But if that is not hinged also, that if the other parts of the being are not participating, like the heart and the vital and the body, and so the surrender, if that is not part of it, becomes partial control, which you get in samadhi or in some states of being of quietude. But the moment you come down to your ordinary consciousness, you're back subject to the action and the mechanism of nature. The only way you can be free from the mechanism of nature in the ordinary consciousness, in the consciousness of living and working and being like all of us, like Raja Janak, or like so many other great sages, is by approaching.
Dwelling in the divine.
So we go back to that. Okay, I want to keep coming back to that raga, because that is the most important thing. Otherwise, we are lost in this whole thing. Okay. Now it is notable. Now it is notable now it is notable that, with a slight but important variation of language, the Gita describes in the same way both the action of the divine in bringing about the ordinary birth of creatures and his action in his birth as the avatar. So, with a slight but important variation of language, the Gita describes in the same way the action of the divine in bringing about the ordinary birth of creatures and his action, divine's action, in his birth as the avatar. And he says in quotation marks, this is a direct translation. Whenever you see a quotation mark here, the direct translation of the Sanskrit verse, leaning upon my own nature, Prakritim Swam Avasthabhya, leaning upon my own nature, Prakritim Swam Avasthabhya, it will say later, I lose forth variously, Vish, Vishdramya, Vishdami, this multitude of creatures, helplessly, I lose forth variously, this multitude of creatures, helplessly subject, owing to the control of Prakriti. So, here he says, the avatar, the divine, leaning upon my own nature, I lose forth variously this multitude of creatures, helplessly subject, owing to the control of Prakriti. Avasam Prakritir Vasat. Standing upon my own nature, it continues. It says here, I am born by my self-mind. So, leaning upon my own nature, I let forth all these creatures who are helplessly subject to the control of Prakriti, the lower nature. Prakriti here is there's a whole mechanism of nature. Then he says, standing upon my own nature, it says, I'm born by my self Maya. By my self Maya, you know what that means, right? Prakritim swam adhishtaya. Atma ma aya, Atma maya, I lose forth myself, Atmanam srajami. So I lose forth myself. Okay? Atmaman srajami. The action implied in the word avasthabhya is a forceful avasthabhya. Okay, is a forceful downward pressure by which the object controlled is overcome, oppressed, blocked, or limited in its movement or working, and becomes helplessly subject to the controlling power. Avasam Vasat. So, this is what he's saying. Now, he's saying, he describes both with a important but slight variation of language. So the slight variation important leaning upon my own nature and standing upon my own nature. So both one he loses forth and one he presses down and he brings forth. So uh, standing upon my own nature, I'm born by myself, mind. Okay? Prakritim swam adhishtaya. Then he says, I lose forth myself. The action implied in the word avasthabhya is a forceful downward pressure by which the object controlled is overcome, oppressed, blocked, or limited in its movement or working and becomes helplessly subject to the controlling power. Avasham vasat. Nature in this action becomes mechanical, and its multitude of creatures are held helpless in the mechanism, not lords of their own action. On the contrary, the action implied in the word adhishtaya is a dwelling in, but also a standing upon and over the nature, conscious control and government by the indwelling Godhead. So, adhishthatri devata, in which the Purusha is not helplessly driven by the Prakriti to ignorance, but rather the Prakriti is full of the light and the will of the Purusha. Therefore, in the normal birth, that which is loose forth, created as we say, is the multitude of creatures or becomings, bhuta kramanam, in the divine birth, that which is loose forth, self-created, is a self-conscious, self-existent being, Atmanam. For the Vedantic distinction between Atma and Bhutani is that which is made in European philosophy between the being and its becomings. In both cases, Maya is the means of the creation or manifestation, but in the divine birth, it is by self Maya, Atma Maya, not the involution, Atma Mayaya, not the involution in the lower Maya of the ignorance, but the conscious action of the self-existent Godhead in its phenomenal self-representation, well aware of its operation and its purpose, that which the Gita calls elsewhere Yoga Maya. So, in the ordinary birth, Yoga Maya is used by the divine to envelop and conceal itself from the lower consciousness. So it becomes, so in the ordinary birth, in the birth of human beings, which lose forth, these multitude of beings that the divine loses forth from itself, Yoga Maya is used by the divine to envelop and conceal itself from the lower consciousness. So it becomes for us the means of the ignorance, avidya Maya. But it is by the same Yoga Maya, the self Maya, that self-knowledge also is made manifest in the return of our consciousness to the divine. It is the means of the knowledge, Vidya Maya, and in the divine birth it so operates, as the knowledge controlling and enlightening the works which are ordinarily done in the ignorance. So this is a passage where Sri Krishna through is explaining the two kinds of birth. Both are from the divine being. One is the birth of the multitude of all creatures, and it is what he calls as avasthabhya, a forceful divine uh, going down, and the force of where the nature is is oppressed, blocked, or limited in its movement or working, and becomes helplessly subject to the controlling power. And this particular is unconscious. The creatures that are born from this are, are by the yoga maya uh, are unable to remember from where they've come. The other is the divine birth of the avatar that conceals his own divine divinity by his self maya. And that yoga maya is different because it is conscious, it is full of knowledge, and it's seated in the divine. It does not lose its consciousness. So this is the two that he is comparing here, the two types of birth. And that's why he starts his paragraph with that it is notable that with a slight but important variation of language, the Gita describes in the same way both the action of the divine in bringing about the ordinary birth of creatures, humanity, and his action in his birth as the avatar. And then he describes the two, and he uses two very important words to differentiate and distinguish the two, avasthabhya and adhishtaya. Okay? And then he says, and then of course you can read this several times yourself to understand it. Or we can read it next time. Okay. So any questions or comments?
My question, Amita, was this phenomenal self-representation. The phenomenal consciousness, which he's talked about earlier, that is governed by that lower Maya. That is what I was saying.
Yes.
Conditioned by the gunas, by the three
the gunas
gunas.
are the three modes of nature and the three states of being. Yeah.
Correct.
Correct.
And the higher, what I'm saying is higher Maya is the Yog Maya, in
Yes.
which, he says it here, the European philosophy between the being and its becomings. Being with a capital B being the
The what
avatar.
philosophy?
It is towards the end of page 155.
Yeah.
Fourth
No, just
line.
read the sentence.
Is that which is made in European philosophy between the being and its becomings. So the being the avatar, capital B, becomings being the multitude. Is that a proper understanding, is my question? Because Maya works in both the cases, he says.
Yeah, that's right. What page is that?
Page 155, bottom of the page, fourth line from the bottom.
Yes.
Where he's explaining distinction
Yes,
between
yes.
Atma and Bhutani.
Yes.
So is
That's
that
the distinction between Atma and Bhutani is that which is made in European philosophy between the being and its becoming. So being is Atma and becomings is Bhutani. In both cases, Maya is the means of the creation or the manifestation. Both of them, Maya is the means of creation, not just one.
yes.
But in the divine birth, it is by self-Maya, Atma Mayaya, not the involution in the lower Maya, okay, of the ignorance,
that,
but the conscious action of the self-existent, Godhead in its phenomenal self. Yes. So
this was my question, that he mentions here the lower Maya in the
yes,
manifestation of the ignorance. So
yes,
we who are caught in the three modes of Prakriti, the gunas, and the lower nature, the ignorance. We are conditioned by this lower Maya, is what I was trying to ask you.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Yeah? Okay.
Yes, yes.
And the being, the avatar, is the capital Yoga Maya. He covers himself with the Yoga Maya. Capital
Not really.
Y.
Sometimes he
Pardon?
uses, not really, because he sometimes uses Yoga Maya also to say that we ourselves are. He's sometimes he changes the way he uses it because they're English words, and sometimes, eh, later on you'll see he will use Yoga Maya in a different way. But doesn't matter. For the time being, it's okay.
Ma'am,
Yes. Who are you?
um,
Yes.
I'm Anushka. So, ma'am, my question is, so when we're discussing this and we think about Prakriti and approaching God, so is this a largely intellectual, emotional realm? Because, again, coming back to when you see things around in the world which disturb you and, which trouble you, and then you feel, bothered by them, how do you see the divine there, and how do you approach God then? Or is it, as we discussed in the earlier classes in the summer, that this is, not for, somebody who's engaging with everyday life? This is for somebody who's actively going beyond and keeping those things aside. I mean, how practical is this? Or is it largely an intellectual, philosophical effort?
Well, I can only speak for myself. I don't think it's an intellectual, philosophical effort. Wouldn't be reading it otherwise. I think it's very practical. It's a book of practice, and it's especially for those who want to live in the world and who experience suffering, who can feel the pain, who have disappointments, who go through the ups and downs of the world. It's meant for those. But what the Gita is saying is that uh, when you have these experiences of suffering and pain and dejection, at that point, call me and lean into me, because when you do that, you open up another realm in you, which is which can receive help and your consciousness over time changes. So if the Gita were just an intellectual understanding for those you know who are not really interested in engaging with the world, then it would not have the kind of universal appeal and attraction that it does to all karma yogis. So in fact, it's great gospel of karma yoga. And the reason for that is it combines karma yoga with bhakti yoga, with jnana yoga, with dhyana yoga, with all of the yogas together. So it's concentration, meditation, love, aspiration, surrender to the divine. And the problem is that it's what he's saying here is very important, because he's saying that what I'm asking you to do is very difficult. Not
Hmm.
Don't for one moment think that it is easy just because you understand it mentally.
Hmm.
A mental understanding will not help you to be able
Hmm.
to practice this. You have to be able to dwell in it. You need to be able to feel the call and to want to come in touch with that divinity in you, the divine. And there is a time you will feel the veil sometimes is rent, and you suddenly come in touch with that divine presence all around. That's when
Hmm.
you understand what Sri Krishna is trying to say.
Hmm. So, when we were doing the chapters in the beginning and we discussed how we are not the doer, uh, that the divine is the doer and we are instruments. And then we had discussed how someone can say that, okay, I can do any kind of bad things and I'm not doing them, God is making me do them, and we had that whole discussion about how no, it does not work like that. You cannot just wash your hands away from whatever you're doing or whatever you're thinking. So so of course I get that it's not for people who have renounced the world, but my question was more that when you're practicing what the Gita says, is that more of an in the moment, in the situation, circumstantial exercise, or is it something that you later on, when you have the time to think, you absorb, you work on whatever you're feeling, so that next time you handle your feelings better or a particular situation better? That's what I was getting at.
So what do you think it is?
I think it's a mix of both. It's a little bit of restraint and being calm and sensible in a particular situation, but a lot of the work happens later when you think, you know, when you sit down to introspect, or when you give yourself the space to approach God and then be reluctant and come back and, go back and forth and to surrender, because it's not easy to surrender, I think, to give up the control and, uh,
Yes.
be devoted.
Good, so you've answered your own question. Anyone else would like to say anything about this?
Can I say just two things, Amita? Firstly, we must never forget that the Gita was taught to Arjuna right at the field of battle. So he was right in the middle of the action. So it is not that it's a philosophy, something that we mull over and think over later. It is based on the moment. Arjuna is in a moment of crisis, if you remember. And that's when the Gita is explained to him by Sri Krishna. So it is very much action and now oriented. That was the first thing I wanted to say. It's not a philosophy. And the second thing that I've understood, I can only share my own personal experience, is that if you understand that we are constantly controlled by the gunas, by the three modes of Prakriti, tamas, rajas, and sattva, that is a huge key to understanding why I'm suffering right now. You see, right at the moment, you can catch yourself that I am the victim or suffering because right now I've allowed myself to fall into tamas. I've
Or
forgotten the
Rajas?
sattvic or the rajas, yes. I'm no longer actively engaged in what I should be engaged in. And therefore, I have fallen into tamas. I need to lift myself up. Only I can do it. No philosophy and no amount of sitting in meditation is going to that time help. So, for me personally, when I face a situation, immediately I've trained myself, it comes with practice. I've trained myself to see which part of the gunas, and then the gunas are not purely tamas, rajas, and sattva, they are mixed. Rajas and tamas are mixed. When you self-examine, you'll see that. And so one has to extricate oneself, however one does it. In my case, I call the mother. I immediately start calling the mother because I feel that it is her higher power, her grace that can pull me out of that, give me the understanding to come out of that situation. So each of us has to work out their own little method, and that's all I had to say, these two things. Thank you for listening.
No, thank you for sharing. Very useful.
I had a
So these
couple
are
of thoughts.
yes.
And I'll come to Anushka's question at the end here. But what I was thinking was that the evolution of consciousness through all of the worlds of nature, from mineral to plant to animal to human to divine, consciousness goes through all of this evolution. And it's the process of going through all of that. Hallelujah. I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. But oh yeah, it's the workings of nature. It's the workings of Prakriti that are happening. And if you look at nature, all of the things that go on, the cycle of nature, where animals, say animals eat plants and animals eat animals and so on. This is all the dynamics of Prakriti. And eventually, human beings, when we go through from the final step, from being an illumined human being to the next step is being a divine being, um, I think that is where reflection, as you were talking about, is an important part of that. We have to process all of the experiences that we go through, that we see in the world. And it's that we're going through the same sort of dynamic process that happens in nature through the whole evolution. We're going through that same thing. So when we're faced with situations where there's problems and difficulties, it's actually that grinding that's Prakriti evolving, and we're refining ourselves to the point where we understand what really is love, what really is devotion, and our life, our world will change as our internal position changes. So our experience of the world transforms as we transform ourselves internally. So I think the reflection process, as you were talking about, I think it's a very important process, because it's through inspiration in those moments of reflection that we get an insight to how to deal with things in a better way. And that's a step-by-step process. It's something that we grow. It takes a lifetime to do that, or lifetimes. And the more diligent that we are, the more ardent about it that we are, the more we want to seek for peace, for inner freedom, then the more we'll aspire for it. Sorry about that. I hope that made sense. I lost my thought there where I was going for a moment.
I think I think very rich discussion
Yeah.
and good
Yeah.
sharing. So Anushka, your question has brought up many uh, things. I hope you got a satisfactory idea and no longer intellectual.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So shall we end? Stay with the minute of concentration.
Very good evening, and let's begin. I want to take it a couple of pages before so that we have the continuity, and also it's an extremely important passage, so it's better to go backwards a bit. If you can turn to the page, now it is notable that with a slight but important variation of language, the Gita describes in the same way both the action of the divine in bringing about the ordinary birth of creatures and his action in his birth. If we come to that page. So, as you saw last time, we were reading about how the divine conceals himself in a thick cloud of darkness or a bright cloud of light and utterly envelops and wraps himself in his yoga maya. And therefore, he is not seen by us in our heart, and we cannot see him seated there because there is a veil between him and us, and that veil is the veil of his yoga maya. And this world, as the Gita says, is bewildered by the three gunas, the three states of being, three modes of natures, and fails to recognize me, Krishna. For this, my divine Maya of the modes of nature is hard to get beyond. Very difficult to get beyond the three modes of nature, and those who do cross it, and those cross beyond it who approach me, who go to me, but those who dwell in the asuric nature of being have their knowledge reft from them by Maya. Now, this is very important. Those who dwell in the asuric nature of being have their knowledge taken away from them by Maya. What is this asuric nature of being? Can anyone tell me? So, anyone can see what page it is? It is 2081, but I'm on a Kindle today, so I don't know. This is a page before what I read.
Yes, it's the last line on page 154.
154. Okay, so there was somebody was asking. So what does this mean? The asuric nature, anger. What else is the asuric nature? That it is the asuric nature of being that it creates a veil between the divine in
Guided
us
by the
and
ego.
us. Yes, guided by the ego. But what does this mean? And those are very specious words. But what is this ego actually? It's desire, it's greed. What else are the signs of the ego?
Pride.
Pride, arrogance. What else?
ईगो पूछ रहा है क्या होती है? I think दूसरे को नीचा दिखाना.
Yes, that also. So all these that are this asuric nature of being is what who approach me escape from it, who are surrendered to me escape from it. But those who dwell in the asuric nature of being have their knowledge reft from them by Maya. Now, this asuric nature of being is something that we have to become conscious of in our nature. There is a part of our nature that is divinely ordained and divinely imbued, and the other part is asuric. It is very self centered, selfish, and does not want to give itself for anything higher, always wants in return. And it has many, many shades of colors and beings. So one has to become aware of what is the asuric part in each one's nature. So each one is different. Some people are more have certain other tendencies, some have others. So for this you need an inner study of oneself. That's why I wanted to dwell on this a bit. Now, in other words, there is the inherent consciousness. So what, in other words, Sri Aurobindo is saying here is that in the Gita is saying there is an inherent consciousness of the divine in all. For in all the divine dwells. But he dwells there covered by his Maya. And the essential self-knowledge of being is reft from them. So he dwells there covered by his Maya, and the essential self-knowledge of being is reft from them, turned into the error of egoism by the action of Maya, the action of the mechanism of Prakriti. Still, by drawing back from the mechanism of Prakriti to her inner and secret master, man can become conscious of the indwelling divinity. So by drawing, how can man become conscious of the indwelling divinity? By drawing back from the mechanism of nature. What is the mechanism of nature? Three modes of being and the three parts. By the mechanism of nature to her inner and secret master, man can become conscious of the indwelling divinity. Now we continue. Now it is notable that with a slight but important variation of language, the Gita describes in the same way both the action of the divine in bringing about the ordinary birth of creatures and his action in his birth as the avatar. Leaning upon my own nature, prakritim swam avisthabhya, it will say later, I lose forth variously. Visrajani, this multitude of creatures helplessly subject owing to the control of Prakriti. Avasham Prakritir Vashat. Standing upon my own nature, it says here, I am born by myself, Maya, Prakriti, Swam, Adhishthaya, Atma Mayaya. I lose forth myself. Atmanam Shajjami. The action implied in the word avasthabhya is a forceful downward pressure by which the object controlled is overcome, oppressed, blocked or limited in its movement or working, and becomes helplessly subject to the controlling power, avasham vasat. Nature in this action becomes mechanical, and its multitude of creatures are held helpless in the mechanism, not lords of their own action. On the contrary, the action implied in the word adhishthaya, is a dwelling in, but also a standing upon and over the nature, a conscious control and government by the indwelling Godhead. Adhishthatri, Devata, in which the Purusha is not helplessly driven by the Prakriti through ignorance, but rather the Prakriti is full of the light and the will of the Purusha. Therefore, in the normal birth, that which is loosed forth, created, as we say, is the multitude of creatures or becomings. Bhuta Gramam. In the divine birth, that which is loosed forth, self-created, is the self-conscious, self-existent being. Atmanam, for the Vedantic distinction between Atma and Bhutani, is that which is made in European philosophy between the being and its becomings. In both cases, Maya is the means of the creation or manifestation. But in the divine birth, it is by self-Maya. Atma Maya, not the involution in the lower Maya of the ignorance, but the conscious action of the self-existent Godhead in its phenomenal self-representation, well aware of its operation and its purpose. That which the Gita calls elsewhere Yoga Maya. In the ordinary birth, Yoga Maya is used by the divine to envelop and conceal itself from the lower consciousness. So in the ordinary birth of in human birth, Yoga Maya is used by the divine to envelop and conceal itself from the lower consciousness. So it becomes for us the means of the ignorance, avidya Maya. But it is by this same Yoga Maya that self-knowledge also is made manifest in the return of our consciousness to the divine. It is the means of the knowledge. So it becomes the same Yoga Maya also becomes a means of knowledge, which is earlier a means of the ignorance. When it is in the it is used by the divine to envelop and conceal itself from the lower consciousness, this Yoga Maya, in the ordinary birth. And yet, it is by the same Yoga Maya that self-knowledge also is made manifest in the return of our consciousness to the divine. It is the means of the knowledge, Vidya Maya. And in the divine birth, it so operates as the knowledge controlling and enlightening the works which are ordinarily done in the ignorance. The language of the Gita shows them that the divine birth is that of the conscious Godhead in our humanity, and essentially the opposite of the ordinary birth, even though the same means are used. So the language of the Gita shows that the divine birth is that of the conscious Godhead, and essentially the opposite of the ordinary birth, even though the same means are used, the Yoga Maya, because it is not the birth into the ignorance, but the birth of the knowledge, not a physical phenomenon, but a soul birth. It is the soul's coming into birth as the self existent being controlling consciously its becoming and not lost to self knowledge in the cloud of ignorance. It is the soul born into the body as Lord of nature, standing above and operating in her freely by its will, not tangled and helplessly driven round and round in the mechanism. For it works in the knowledge and not as most do in the ignorance. So, is this clear to everybody? Yes? Okay. So, it is the soul born into the body as Lord of nature, standing above and operating in her freely by its will, not entangled and helplessly driven round and round in the mechanism. This is how the descent, the avatar, is that birth. For it works in the knowledge and not as most do in the ignorance. It is the secret soul in all coming forward from its governing secrecy behind the veil to possess wholly in a human type, but as the divine, the birth, which ordinarily it possesses only from behind the veil, as the Ishvara, while the outward consciousness in front of the veil is rather possessed than in possession, because there it is a partially conscious being, the Jiva, lost to self knowledge and bound in its works through a phenomenal subjection to nature. The avatar, therefore, is a direct manifestation in humanity by Krishna, the divine soul, of that divine condition of being to which Arjuna, the human soul, the type of a highest human being, a vibhuti, is called upon by the teacher to arise. So this is important. So therefore, what it's saying is, the avatar is a direct manifestation in humanity by Krishna, the divine soul of that divine condition of being, to which Arjuna, the human soul, so the difference is the divine soul and the human soul, the type of the highest human being of Vibhuti, unlike Avatar, who is a direct descent of the divine. So there is the distinction between what is the Vibhuti. The Vibhuti is the highest type of the human soul, the highest type, and the divine soul is called the descent of the divine being into the human body is the Avatar. So he is a complete incarnation, is a manifestation of a different consciousness in all, outer nature and every nature. So the avatar, therefore, is a direct manifestation in humanity by Krishna, the divine soul, of that divine condition of being to which Arjuna, the human soul, the type of a highest human being, a vibhuti, is called upon by the teacher to arise, and to which he can only arise by climbing out of the ignorance and limitation of his ordinary humanity. It is the manifestation from above of that which we have to develop from below. It is the descent of God into the divine birth of the human being, into which we mortal creatures must climb. It is the attracting divine example given by God to man in the very type and form and perfected model of our human existence. So here, very clearly, Sri Aurobindo makes a very clear distinction between what is an avatar in the example of Sri Krishna and who is the Vibhuti in the example of Arjuna. And what is the Vibhuti, or the highest individual human soul that is ready to ascend into the divine nature has to do? He has to overcome, climb out of the ignorance and limitation of his ordinary humanity, and It is the descent of God into that divine birth of the human being into which we mortal creatures must climb. It is the attracting divine example given by God to man in the very type and form and perfected model of our human existence. So when Arjun sees Sri Krishna, his example, his when he interacts with him, when he is in his he imbues and imbibes his consciousness, and that helps him to overcome his uh, imperfections of nature. Okay, so that ends the chapter 15. Any questions or comments or anything you would like to further discuss before we move on? Has everybody understood, or is it an indication that no one has? All right. So this is a very important chapter, I think, because it really clearly gives the path. It also shows very clearly makes some very, very important statements of who is the divine, how he dwells, and that those who know not the divine lodged in the human body are ignorant of it because they are grossly subject to this mechanism of Prakriti, helplessly subject to its mental limitations and acquiescent in them. So all these wonderful statements given here are something that one needs to meditate on.